Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house. As soon as my parents passed away, my husband, Dennis, having demolished our family home, stood in front of its site and blurted this out to me. Standing there in shock, I asked, "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and bring the inheritance to our place," he said. At his words, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. So, that's what this was all about, I realized. What are you laughing about? Don't you guys know what you're talking about? Dennis and my in-laws looked at me quizzically as I laughed. It was then that I told them the truth. My name is Misery Nathaniel. I was born the eldest daughter to ordinary office worker parents. I have one brother, a very normal family. I married Dennis when I was 29, and we had 2 kids. Juggling work and parenting, I suddenly found myself at 55. My son, Sean, and daughter, Dennis, had grown up to be fine adults, each living on their own and struggling with their new careers. Now was the time to relax with my husband. It was an ordinary life, but I was happy. I thought I would continue to age like this, but my mundane life changed one winter day. My father was in a car accident and suddenly passed away. He was only 72 at the time. Our whole family was engulfed in grief, especially my mother, who was so depressed she couldn't even eat. "Mom, I know it's hard, but you have to eat," I told her time and time again. "I know, but I just don't have the appetite. It feels like there's something stuck in my chest." My brother and I thought she was just emotionally distressed and watched her for a while. However, she rapidly lost weight in just half a month. Worried, I took her to the hospital. Cancer, the doctor's diagnosis left me in shock. The cancer was advanced, and surgery wasn't an option. With about a year left to live, I hadn't had the chance to really take care of my parents yet. Just when I thought I had lost my father, now my mother too was facing this. I was even more devastated than when my father passed, but I didn't have the luxury of grieving forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon, so it was up to me to take care of my mother. I immediately told Dennis that I wanted to live with my mother. I couldn't leave her alone, both emotionally and physically, in her illness. But Dennis's reaction was unexpected. "What? We just finished dealing with your dad's funeral, and now I have to be dragged into more of your family's issues," he said with a sigh, obviously annoyed. "You don't have to say it like that. Can't you just drive her to the hospital and back? Do we really have to live with her? I think she might feel lonely if it's not okay. Maybe I can just live at my family home for a while," I suggested. Then Dennis became indignant. "What? And who's going to take care of my meals while you're gone? I'll come and cook, of course. What about cleaning? Who's going to do the laundry?" I fell silent. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't do everything as before. Being confronted with this reality hurt. If someone said I was being selfish for wanting to care for and nurse my mother, I wouldn't be able to argue back. I'm sure my mother, being considerate, would say everything is fine as it is, but I really wanted to do something for my parents. "Fine, but I'm not helping with anything, you hear?" Dennis grudgingly said to my silence. His attitude was arrogant, but he had ultimately agreed. "I'm sorry and thank you," I said. Although I thought he was being awful, he had agreed to my wish. I suppressed my desire to argue back and thanked him despite the trouble. Dennis and I started living with my mother at my family home. We had originally been living in a house provided by Dennis's employer. Dennis was an only child, and since Dennis's father really wanted us to live together, we didn't plan on buying our own home and were going to eventually move in with Dennis's parents. Living in the company housing was more convenient for work, and the rent was only about $600 a month, so it wasn't a big burden. But now that we've moved to my family home, we don't have to pay that anymore, and we have more space. I think living together wasn't all disadvantages for Dennis. True to his word, Dennis didn't help out with anything, but I'm glad I could live with my mother. She seemed energetic, but she often felt weak and spent a lot of time lying down during the day. I prepared her meals, fed her, and managed her medication. It would have been impossible for her to do all that alone. I'm sorry, Misery, thank you. It's a big help that you're here with me. I should thank Dennis too, my mother said, expressing her gratitude to us many times. She was unaware of the harsh words Dennis had said about living together, so she was grateful to him too. One evening, after my mother had gone to bed and Dennis returned home while serving dinner, I brought up the subject of my mother's treatment. Dennis glared at me and said, "I don't know what you want me to say. I told you I'm not helping with anything." He refused even to listen. I needed someone to vent to, someone to consult. All I wanted was for Dennis to listen. Even after a month, 2 months, Dennis's attitude didn't change. He constantly complained about living together, acting as if he was doing a great favor, and his behavior became increasingly obnoxious day by day. But I couldn't say anything against it. Between worrying about my mother and being considerate of Dennis, I was becoming more stressed. Around the time of the 1-year prognosis, my mother's condition worsened rapidly, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Although I had prepared myself mentally, I was devastated. My brother's family and my children came right away and helped a lot, but in times like this, you really want your spouse by your side. However, Dennis was laughing and chatting with his parents in a corner, not helping with the funeral preparations at all. My brother had taken a lead role in preparation, and somehow we got everything ready for the funeral. But Dennis, who should have been sitting in the family section, was at the very back of the relatives section. "Dennis, I want you to sit in the family section," I said. But he replied, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all." "But you're my husband," I said. Then his mother chimed in, "He's your husband, but he's not your mother's son. Dennis is our son, so he's an outsider, you know." "Yeah, Dennis's parents are just us. Misery should sit in the family section," she continued. Hearing this from my in-laws, I was left speechless. From where I come from, it's common for sons-in-law to sit in the family section at funerals, though this might vary by area. Sure enough, with Dennis not found in the family section, distant relatives started whispering, wondering if we had divorced. It's one thing for people to gossip, but all of this could have been avoided if Dennis had just sat there. Feeling a bit upset that Dennis wasn't by my side, we still managed to see my mother off peacefully. After the funeral, my brother's family, my children, Dennis, and his parents returned to my family home. "Thank you for coming, especially at such a busy time," I said to my in-laws, offering them some tea. They laughed and replied, "Really, it's something. First your father, now your mother. These funeral expenses are a burden for us too, but at least that's the end of it." I was stunned by their words. What did they mean by that? I couldn't believe they would say such a thing. I forced a smile and excused myself. Then I overheard Dennis talking with his parents. "It must have been tough for you, Dennis, living with outsiders," his father said. "Yeah, dealing with Misery's whims was a pain. A husband shouldn't just follow his wife's demands. If you don't like something, you have every right to refuse," his mother added. I clenched my fists. Their voices, laughing and chatting, were unbearable. But this wasn't new. Dennis's parents had always been insensitive and rude. When Dennis and I got married, his mother said, "Couldn't you find someone more attractive? I can't expect much for grandchildren." His father joked, "They say beauty gets boring after 3 days. With Misery, you won't get bored." And Dennis just laughed. "It's funny," he said. "Such a disrespectful family." I felt something snap inside me. Reflecting back, neither Dennis nor his parents had said a single comforting word to me, either at my father's funeral or after my mother's passing. Instead, they ridiculed me. I had felt sorry for imposing on Dennis, but now I questioned his behavior as a person. I had been too concerned about Dennis while just wanting to do right by my mother. I realized I shouldn't have felt so guilty towards Dennis, especially since he wasn't supportive. While I simmered in anger, Dennis and his parents continued to laugh and chat in another room. If my brother's family and my kids had heard them, they would have been upset, but fortunately, they were in the kitchen. I was relieved to be the only one who heard Dennis and his parents' conversation. Then I heard more from my mother-in-law. "Misery," she said, startling me. "Yes," I replied. "Can I have this?" she asked, holding my mother's purse. Confused, I stammered, well, your mother won't be needing it anymore, right?" Dennis suggested I take it home. "Maybe I'll just keep it," she said, holding up the purse, appraising it. I couldn't believe her audacity, especially right after the funeral. I took the purse from her and said firmly, "No, you can't." Her expression changed, not so much about the purse being taken away, but more about me, her daughter-in-law, standing up to her. Yet, I stood my ground. "We're not ready to sort through my mother's belongings yet. We'll distribute her keepsakes among the family later." My mother-in-law turned red with anger. "What do you mean? Are you saying I'm an outsider? You said earlier at the funeral that even Dennis was an outsider to my mother. How come Dennis is an outsider, but your family?" I retorted. Hearing this, Dennis and his father also turned red. "What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. How disrespectful, a daughter-in-law talking like that." Their commotion drew everyone from the other room. I didn't expect to be called an outsider after all the effort we put into attending the funeral. "Let's go home, Dad," my mother-in-law shouted at me in front of everyone and stormed out of our house. For some reason, even Dennis was angry and left with his parents. "What happened? Did you really call your mother-in-law an outsider?" everyone asked me, having heard only her side, taken out of context. It might have seemed like I was the one being harsh, but I explained the situation to everyone. Not a single person blamed me. Grandpa and Grandma should be more considerate of other people's feelings. That's just how Dad and Grandpa have always been. My children sided with me. But I still couldn't forgive those three. Dennis hadn't come home for a while since that day. I hadn't contacted him either. I didn't think I should be the one to apologize, and I wasn't sure if I could forgive him even if he did. But I knew things couldn't stay this way forever. Then one day, Dennis came back. "Welcome home," I greeted him, suppressing the anger that flared up at the sight of him. "Really, Dad suggested this? It's surprising, isn't it?" The kids were astonished by my proposal. It seemed like it really was a gift for Dennis. "I wonder if Dad feels bad about what happened," I said, laughing. I gratefully accepted the travel vouchers for Dennis. "I'll be off then." "Yeah, take your time. Stay with the kids at their places too." "Why not?" "Really? I can't be away that long." "Don't worry about me. I'll relax at my parents'." "Just enjoy yourself," Dennis said. With that, he sent me off. Dennis was happy to have me visit, so before the spa trip, I stopped by her place and then Sean's. I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for my mother, so I helped out by cooking and freezing meals for them. "Mom, you should relax, but thanks, this really helps," they both said, delighted to have my cooking at home. This opportunity was all thanks to Dennis's suggestion. Then came the eagerly awaited spa trip. I spent a relaxing time at the hot springs with my children. The weariness from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents seemed to have healed quite a bit. I was away for almost a week, but both my kids returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad for once, Dennis said. True, just this once. But I wonder if he's up to something, she joked. Don't say that. Dad thought about us in his own way, I laughed. When I returned home, planning to share the memories with Dennis and start our life anew as a couple, however, when I arrived home, I was speechless. What? The house is. I looked around in disbelief. Despite recognizing the location, the family home that should have been there was gone. Then, out of nowhere, Dennis appeared, followed by his parents. They were grinning at me, standing there dumbfounded. Dennis, what's going on? I asked. With the same sickening smile, Dennis said, finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house. What are you talking about? I replied, trying to stay calm. Then he opened his mouth. Have you lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Bring the inheritance to our place quickly. Whatever you inherited, it's Dennis's now. I realized then. The disappearance of the house was Dennis's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. Such betrayal. After thinking about the future on my way home, I was filled with indescribable sadness and anger. But demolishing the house won't make things go Dennis's way. I won't let it. I burst into laughter at the sight of their smirking faces. My laughter baffled Dennis and his father. What? Why are you laughing? What a weird woman. Has she gone crazy? My mother-in-law looked at me as if I were something eerie. Facing the three of them, I spoke up. Don't you guys know what you're talking about? I said to him. First off, I haven't inherited a single penny, so there's no inheritance. After saying that, I burst into laughter again. Perhaps they mistakenly thought they'd become rich from the inheritance. Their wild imaginations and actions had me in uncontrollable laughter. What do you mean? Explain yourself. Dennis demanded. But I kept my mouth shut. I felt no need to enlighten them. Before that, I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, go ahead alone. Ignoring Dennis's question and rejecting his initial suggestion made my mother-in-law furious. You helped with your parents' housework, but you can't do ours. You're aware of the circumstances, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? I told you I didn't want to live together. Have you forgotten that? You chose to live together to avoid housework, I said. Dennis and his mother bit their lips as I refuted them one after another. Also, demolishing the family home like that. There are things you just shouldn't do. I yelled at them and then left the scene behind me. Dennis's voice called out, "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. Right now, I needed to find a place to sleep for the night, and I really didn't want to see Dennis's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. Demolishing a house couldn't be that easy. The house is still in my mother's name. As I wondered which company had done it, an unbelievable truth came to light. Dennis and his father had demolished it themselves. His father, who worked in demolition, enlisted the help of acquaintances and even rented heavy machinery. The planning was meticulous. Moreover, they even gave me travel vouchers to get rid of me. Tears welled up in my eyes at the realization of being deceived, and the frustration was unbearable. Is there any way to punish all three of them? As I tearfully explained my situation, the lawyer smiled at me kindly. Dennis unlawfully demolished the house in your mother's name. He can be charged with property destruction and held liable for damages. Let's start by demanding a formal apology from Dennis and his parents. I nodded in agreement. The lawyer quickly proceeded with the necessary actions. A few days later, Dennis called me, furious about the legal notice he received. What? What's with this certified letter? Oh, you got it. You destroyed my precious house. Of course, you have to compensate. We said we were moving to my parents' place. I demolished a house that nobody was going to live in. You should be thanking me, not asking for compensation. Now bring the inheritance and come back home, he said arrogantly. Thank me for demolishing my house. Don't make me laugh. And what inheritance? It's not even been settled yet. I shouted back over the phone. Dennis was silent, seemingly taken aback by my anger, which I rarely displayed. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was exactly this. I had a whole year with my mother. It was obvious that we would discuss matters of inheritance, so I told my brother, I don't want anything. Give it all to you. As a result, he inherited all the cash and stocks. He insisted that I should have the house, as he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could even be rented out. That was the plan for me to inherit the house anyway. Either you and your father restore the house to its original state or pay the amount specified in the letter. That amount of money, I was considering settling this amicably. Well, fine, if you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you, I declared. I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd get so angry. Of course, I'm angry. What do you expect? He began to make excuses. He seemed to think that if my family home was gone, he wouldn't have to live with his parents. Especially Dennis's father had always desired to live together. Dennis's father seemed to have a fondness for Sean and apparently wanted to live with him. Dennis had refused to live together before, citing difficult commutes, but his parents thought I was the one against it, so he convinced them by demolishing my house and making it seem like I'd move in with them with the inheritance. But I couldn't forgive him after hearing such a thing. Please give me a break. I didn't mean any harm. Dad's sorry too. If he's truly sorry, then agree to the settlement, I said and hung up the phone. Dennis kept calling in, sending messages apologizing. If you're sorry, just transfer the money. I pushed him away. I knew my childhood home couldn't be restored, but this was the only way I could process my unbearable feelings. Afterwards, I stayed at Dennis's place. This situation was known to my brother's family and my children. Although my brother must have been angry about our house being demolished without his consent, he said, I won't interfere, but I'll help in any way I can. Do what you think is best, misery. Everyone condemned Dennis's actions and supported me. A month passed without any compensation or alimony payment for Dennis. During that time, there was no contact from him. I couldn't stay with Dennis forever. I wanted to get the money as soon as possible to at least establish a living foundation. Contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed by Dennis. This apron looks a lot like Grandma's, she said, showing me her smartphone screen. I was surprised when I saw it. It was a listing on a flea market app. The apron Dennis mentioned, similar to my mother's, was a unique one I had made for her. What? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so I'm sure, I said. Dennis quickly checked other listings. The seller seemed to have recently joined the app with no transactions or reviews yet. There were nearly 30 items listed, and to my horror, all of them belonged to my mother. I immediately realized it was Dennis. He was the only one who could have taken my mother's belongings after demolishing the house. I called Dennis right away. What's this about the app? Dennis responded, sounding annoyed. Furious, I thought Dennis was pretending not to know. Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's things without permission, aren't you? Cancel those listings right now. Dennis, sounding panicked, replied, What? No, it wasn't me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over right now to get everything back, I said and hung up. Then I immediately headed to Dennis's parents' house with Dennis. Where are Mom's things? I demanded as soon as we arrived and called out for Dennis. Confronting Dennis at the door, he stuttered, I I don't know anything about it. Tell the truth, Dad. Dennis joined me in pressuring Dennis. He seemed flustered. Dennis's parents, noticing our presence, came out. "Oh, Dennis, you're here," Dennis's mom greeted, smiling at the sight of her granddaughter. Angry, Dennis said, "Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth." The truth. Grandma's belongings that passed away recently, Dad seems to be selling them. At Dennis's words, Dennis's mom burst into laughter. Dennis, with a troubled look, kept repeating, "It really wasn't me." Then his mother loudly exclaimed, "Dennis is selling them." "That's impossible." "But because I am the one selling them," I said. I felt my blood run cold. Dennis probably knew about it. With a look that almost said, "This is bad," he turned to look at his mother. Despite Dennis's shock, his mother cheerfully continued, "What? It's a lot of work, you know. I have to pack everything carefully and make sure the photos look good." She seemed oblivious to the fact that she was selling stolen goods, chatting happily about the app. I struggled to restrain myself from lunging at her. "Cancel the listings. Those aren't yours to sell," Dennis read with anger and tears in her eyes, pleaded with her grandmother. However, Dennis's mother seemed displeased. "What's the big deal? I finally found a hobby I enjoy. I use the things I can and sell the rest for a little pocket money. It's good for preventing dementia. I'm the only grandma left, so Dennis wants me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she said nonchalantly. Pleading with her to stop had no effect. There was no sign of remorse. But if talking won't help, then action is the only option. "Dennis, let's go." "But it's okay, let's go." I pulled Dennis out of the house and headed straight to the police station. I wasn't planning to file a report for the demolition of the house, but theft is a different story. When I explained to the police that my mother's belongings were being stolen and sold, they acted immediately. Dennis's mother's account on the flea market app was suspended. The items wouldn't be sold anymore. I called Dennis on the way back from the station. "I had your mother's account stopped. You knew about it, right? You're complicit." "No, I've filed a police report about this. Please cooperate with the investigation." Dennis became frantic. "We're family, right? Withdraw it, please." "Family? You still haven't paid any compensation for the house nor alimony, and there's no sign of remorse." Faced with my shouting, Dennis was taken aback. "But I'm not heartless. Despite everything, I have feelings for Dennis, having lived with him for so long," I said, sighing. "I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Return everything. And Dennis, your father looked quite unwell. Has he seen a doctor?" "What? I'm not a monster, so just passing on that message," I said and hung up. Dennis's father, whom I had just seen, was alarmingly thin and hadn't spoken much. His complexion was more than just pale, it was unnaturally dark. His ill health was obvious, but that family probably hadn't noticed. His wife nonchalantly selling stolen items, and Dennis, who only acted tough with me, they lacked any real concern for others. The next day, I received a call from Dennis's father. Expecting it to be a thank you call, I was met with the complete opposite. "What do you mean by treating me like a sick person? Planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of the hassle? I need to protect Dennis and my wife from you." "I'm not going to any hospital," he scolded. It was shocking to be reprimanded when I was just concerned. "Sorry for overstepping. I was just worried. I'm not frail or short-lived like your parents. Don't make a fool of me," he said. I was infuriated by his words, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell enough to visit the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Dennis called me in a panic. "Dad got terminal cancer. What am I going to do?" But I just snorted. I don't know. What did you say when I suggested going to the hospital? He said, I'm not frail or short-lived like your parents, so deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless, Misery? I never thought you'd be such a person. Who's heartless? Did you ever say a single warm word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your own actions, I said and hung up. As expected, Dennis's father passed away soon after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor negative feelings towards the deceased, but recalling everything that had been done and said, I couldn't shed a tear after his funeral. His will was found. Despite all his talk of not being short-lived, he had made thorough preparations. The house goes to the grandson, Sean. The rest of the estate is to be divided between my wife and eldest son, I read. I was surprised to see Sean's name. Dennis's father had always favored him, wanting to live with him. He must have wanted Sean to have the house even after his death. It was a nuisance for Sean. Renounce the inheritance. You don't need that house, do you? I told Sean. But he was happy to receive it. Inheriting the house was more of a burden than a benefit due to inheritance tax, but if he was pleased, I had no right to say anything. Following the will, Sean inherited the house. His grandmother was happy and paid the inheritance tax. He's our successor after all, she said. Well, that's not wrong, I said, while I felt a bit sad, as if Sean had been taken from me. Something unbelievable happened next. Come over to our house, Dennis's call prompted me to head straight to his parents' house. Then I saw Dennis's mother and Dennis himself standing in front of their house, stunned, just like I once had been. The site was filled with heavy machinery trucks labeled with demolition company names and workers. Their house was being torn down right before our eyes. What's going on? I asked. It's my house. I can do what I want with it, Sean said, appearing from somewhere, looking satisfied as he watched the demolition. Sean, what are you doing? Stop this right now. Stopping it now won't make it livable anyway, Sean said. Shaw, what have you done? Dennis's mother and Dennis were begging Sean. But Sean just laughed. Did you forget what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Sean, Grandma, you were awful to Mom too, right? Did you apologize? Sean's smile turned into a sharp glare at Dennis's mother and Dennis. They fell to their knees. The heavy machinery continued to noisily dismantle their house. I finally felt relieved seeing this scene. Later, Dennis finally paid the damages and compensation from the inherited assets. The stolen items that Dennis's mother took from my mother were retrieved by Sean and safely returned to me. You always have me and Dennis, Sean said, and I finally shed tears of relief. Dennis's mother and Dennis, having lost their house and left with no money, were now living in a company house again. Dennis and I had moved out of the company house, but now Dennis and his mother had to return, becoming the subject of rumors. I explained the whole truth to Dennis's colleague's wife, who we were on good terms with. Dennis and his mother will likely have a hard life in the company housing, but it's their own doing. Additionally, after Dennis's retirement, they'll be forced to save up for a new place to live, I said. I sometimes think about asking my friend how Dennis and his mother are living now, just to have something to talk about. After that, I continued to stay at Dennis's house, but then Sean got engaged to be married. He was planning to build a house. The land of the former family home sold for a decent amount, and I was glad to see that even that house served a purpose. Mom, come live with us, Sean offered. His fiancée welcomed me warmly. Since I couldn't keep relying on Dennis, who lived alone indefinitely, I decided to take up on Sean's offer. I am thinking of living happily with my new family, determined not to become a mother-in-law like my own mother-in-law. Let's conclude the story shortly. Misery, now living with Sean and his fiancée, found a newfound peace. She was surrounded by love and support, a stark contrast to the toxic environment she'd endured with Dennis and his family. The inheritance drama had settled, leaving Dennis and his mother to face the consequences of their actions. They were back in the company housing, their lives a stark reminder of their own greed and lack of empathy. Sean, having inherited the family home and using the money from its sale, built a beautiful house for himself and his fiancée. Misery felt a sense of closure, knowing that the land that had held so many memories was now being used to create a new, happy home. Though she couldn't erase the pain of her losses, she had learned valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and the importance of standing up for what's right. She vowed to cherish the love she had found with her children and their families, and to never again allow herself to be taken advantage of. The bitterness of her past had finally faded, replaced by a quiet, contented happiness. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.
Welcome to the Retaliation Realm channel. We hope you enjoy today's story. I remember the day everything began to change. It was a Tuesday morning, much like any other, except it wasn't. I was in the kitchen, trying to get breakfast ready for Alex, our 4-year-old, who was energetically running around. Mark was in the dining room, already buried in his phone, probably checking work emails. I met Mark at his family's company. I started in the marketing department while he was in finance. We hit it off at a company picnic. 2 years later, we were married. I thought it was love, but after the wedding, things changed. Mark and his family insisted I become a housewife. It's for the best, they said. I didn't realize then that it was the beginning of losing myself. Mommy, I want pancakes. Alex's voice cut through my thoughts. Coming right up, honey, I replied, flipping a pancake on the skillet. Mark's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the morning air. Evelyn, are you going to take all day? I have an important meeting. Sorry, just finishing up here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The clatter of plates as I set them on the table seemed louder than usual. Mark barely glanced at the breakfast. This bacon is undercooked, he muttered, pushing the plate away. I felt a sting in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I'll make a note of it for next time, I said, plastering a smile on my face. Alex, oblivious to the tension, chattered away about his toy cars. I envied his innocence. Mark's mother, Helen, chose that moment to make her grand entrance, as if on cue. Evelyn, darling, let me show you how to cook bacon properly. Mark likes it crispy. I watched as she took over my kitchen, my home, my life. Helen had always been the matriarch, overseeing everything with a critical eye, and there I was her project. You have to let it cook on low heat for longer. You'd know if you paid more attention, Helen said, flipping the bacon with an air of superiority. Mark nodded in agreement, not meeting my eyes. Mom knows best, he said. I bit back a retort, focusing on Alex's bright smile as he munched on his pancakes. As they left the kitchen, Helen wore a satisfied smile, and Mark remained glued to his phone. I stood there amidst the sizzling pans and the half-eaten breakfast, feeling more alone than ever. As days turned into weeks, the distance between Mark and me grew. It was like living with a stranger. He came home late, left early, and we barely spoke. I tried to bridge the gap, but it was like talking to a wall. One evening, I decided to make his favorite spaghetti dish. I spent hours in the kitchen, hoping it would bring back a spark, anything. I set the table, lit candles, and even put on some music, the kind we used to dance to. When Mark finally came home, he didn't even notice the effort. He just slumped into his chair, eyes fixed on his phone. "What's this?" he asked, poking at the spaghetti. "I thought I'd make your favorite," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a bite and grimaced. "It's too salty." "Didn't you taste it?" I felt a lump in my throat. "I thought it was okay," I stammered. He pushed the plate away. "I'm not eating this. I'll order a pizza." My heart sank as I cleared the untouched food. It felt like I was throwing away more than just spaghetti. Alex, bless his soul, tried to lighten the mood. "Mommy, can I have pizza too?" "Of course, sweetie, of course," I managed to smile for him, but the silence that followed was deafening. Mark ate his pizza, eyes glued to the TV, while I picked at my food. The gap between us felt like a chasm. The next day was no different. I was folding laundry when Mark walked in, his face like a thundercloud. "Can't you do something about all this mess?" he snapped, kicking at a toy car Alex had left on the floor. "I try to keep up, but with Alex, it's a bit challenging," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "Well, try harder." "It's not rocket science to keep a house clean," he retorted, not even looking at me. I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'm doing my best, Mark." "Your best isn't good enough," he muttered, storming off to his office, the spare room he had taken over. It was like this every day. The man I married, who used to make me laugh, who used to listen, was gone. In his place was this cold, indifferent person I barely recognized. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Mark's breathing, I realized how alone I felt. The man lying next to me might as well have been a million miles away. I missed the warmth, the love, the connection we once had. But most of all, I missed the man I thought I married. And in the darkness, a thought crept into my mind: maybe this was the beginning of the end. Things took a sharp turn when Mark got promoted to head of the family company. It was as if that title flipped a switch in him. He started coming home even later, sometimes not at all. When he was home, it was like living with a king who thought his castle wasn't good enough. One evening, he swaggered in, reeking of expensive cologne and self-importance. "Evelyn, we need to talk about your appearance," he said, eyeing me like I was a piece of outdated furniture. I was taken aback by his suggestion. "What about it?" He sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "You've let yourself go. It's embarrassing. I'm the head of a major company now. I can't have you looking like this," he said, his words making my cheeks burn. "I'm taking care of Alex and the house. I don't exactly have time for a beauty routine," I replied. He rolled his eyes. "Excuses. If you cared enough, you'd find the time. Get a gym membership, do something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So it's all about appearances for you now? What happened to love me for who I am?" He scoffed. "That was before I realized I could do better. Shape up, Evelyn, or I might have to make some changes." I was speechless. The man I'd loved, the father of my child, was telling me I wasn't good enough for him anymore. I felt like I was drowning, and he was the water. The next day, I tried to talk to him about it, hoping he had been in a bad mood and didn't mean it. He was in the kitchen, sipping his expensive coffee, scrolling through his phone. "Mark, about last night." "I think we need to talk," I started, my hands trembling. "Not now, Evelyn. I have a meeting," he dismissed. "But this is important." "You hurt me," I insisted. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold. I said what needed to be said. "You're the one who needs to change, not me." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. "You used to love me the way I was." He snorted. "That was before I realized my worth." "You should too." I walked away, feeling a piece of my heart break off. The man I'd married was gone, in his place was this stranger who judged me, who made me feel small and worthless. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the silence of the house, I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay and wither away under his contempt, or I could leave and try to find myself again. It was a terrifying thought, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could be strong enough to start again. It was at one of those overly formal family dinners that I felt the full weight of being disregarded. The dinner table was set like something out of a magazine, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. Mark and his father, John, were absorbed in discussing the family business. I sat there, a silent observer, my presence seemingly forgotten. The quarterly reports need serious attention. Sales must pick up, John stated, his voice firm and businesslike. Mark was quick to respond. We're considering expanding our marketing, maybe even breaking into new international markets. Hearing this, I couldn't help but speak up. Marketing was my turf, my passion before I was reduced to just a housewife. Have you thought about leveraging digital marketing? Social media platforms could be a great way to widen your reach, I suggested, a bit hesitantly. There was a pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, to my dismay, John burst into laughter. Social media, really, Evelyn? It's endearing that you want to help, but let's leave the business talk to us, shall we? Mark joined in with a patronizing chuckle. Keep to what you're good at, Evelyn. Let us handle the business. I felt a flush of embarrassment and anger. I have a background in marketing. My suggestions are valid, I retorted, a little more sharply. John dismissed me with a wave of his hand. That was years ago, dear. You're out of touch. You have other responsibilities now. The rest of the dinner went by in a blur of humiliation and anger. Their words stung, belittling not just my ideas, but my very identity. Later, needing some solace and support, I went to see my dad. He had always been my pillar of strength, the one who always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. Dad, they just brushed me off like I don't matter, I said, my voice tinged with frustration and hurt. Evelyn, I've always told you about Mark and his family's nature, Dad replied, his tone a mix of concern and a hint of, I told you so. I know, Dad, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. They treat me as if I'm invisible, I admitted, feeling defeated. Evelyn, you're not invisible, you're smart and capable. Don't let them diminish you, he encouraged, his voice firm. But I feel trapped, Dad. I don't know what to do, I confessed, feeling a sense of despair. That's when Dad surprised me. What if we shake things up a bit? I've got some money set aside from some successful investments. How about I buy shares in Mark's family company? I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. You're joking, right? No, I'm serious. It's high time someone showed them you're not to be underestimated, Dad said. I laughed despite the situation. The thought of my dad, the outsider, getting involved in their precious family business was absurd yet strangely satisfying. Life as I knew it came crashing down one ordinary Tuesday. I had been feeling under the weather for a while, but I brushed it off as stress or fatigue. It wasn't until I found a lump that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doctor's appointment was supposed to be routine, but it wasn't. Sitting in the sterile doctor's office, the words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm sorry, Evelyn, but it's breast cancer. We caught it early, but you'll need immediate treatment, the doctor said. I sat there numb. Cancer? Me? It couldn't be, but the doctor's solemn face told me it was all too real. I have a son and a family. What? What are my options? My voice sounded distant, even to my ears. We'll discuss treatment plans, but we must start soon. The doctor said gently. I walked home in a daze. How do I tell Mark? How do I tell Alex? My mind was a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Mark was in the living room when I got home, glued to his laptop as usual. Mark, we need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced up, annoyed. What now, Evelyn? Can't you see I'm busy? I took a deep breath. It's serious. I went to the doctor today. I have breast cancer. For a moment, there was silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. Cancer, great. Just what I needed, more drama. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. Mark, did you hear what I said? I have cancer, I repeated. He sighed, closing his laptop with a snap. Yeah, I heard you. So what? Does this mean more doctor visits? How is this going to affect me and the company? I was speechless. How could he be so callous? It means I need treatment, Mark. I need support. He stood up, pacing the room. Well, you better get it sorted quickly. I can't have you slacking off on housework and taking care of Alex. I felt like I was in some nightmare. Is that all you care about? The house, the work? What about me? He stopped, looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. Look, Evelyn, it's not that I don't care, but you have to understand, the timing is terrible. We have a business to run. The rest of the conversation was a blur. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I was alone, truly alone in this. The following weeks were a whirlwind of appointments, treatments, and overwhelming fatigue. I tried to keep up with the house and Alex, but it was too much. Mark's patience wore thin. One evening, after a particularly grueling treatment, I was too exhausted to cook. Mark, can we order in tonight? I'm just not up to it, I pleaded. He scoffed. Order in again? What do I keep you around for if you can't even cook a simple meal? It was a crushing blow, not just to my body, but to my heart. The day of my surgery loomed over me like a dark cloud. I was scared, not just of the surgery itself, but of what life would be like after. I would wake up less of a woman, or so I felt. My body, once a source of pride, was now a traitor. I didn't expect Mark to hold my hand and tell me everything would be okay, those days were long gone, but I did hope for a semblance of support. Instead, what I got was indifference. As I was getting ready for the hospital, Mark was busy getting dressed for work. You'll be fine, right? The doctors know what they're doing, he said, not even looking at me. Yeah, I guess, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused his hand on the door handle. Call me when it's done. I've got an important meeting, can't miss it. I felt a lump form in my throat. Sure, I'll call. The surgery was a blur, but waking up was worse. I felt a void where part of me used to be. My parents were there when I opened my eyes, their faces etched with concern and love. Mom, Dad, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. We're here, sweetheart, we're here, Mom said, taking my hand. Mark didn't show up. Not that day or the next. He didn't even call. It was as if my surgery, my cancer, was a minor inconvenience best kept out of sight, out of mind. Recovery was slow and painful, but eventually, I was allowed to go home. I dreaded it, not knowing what to expect from Mark. I arrived home to a shock. Mark wasn't alone. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, was in my living room. She was laughing at something he said, familiarly touching his arm. Mark, what's going on? My voice was a croak, still weak from the surgery. He looked up, surprised, and then his expression hardened. Evelyn, let's talk in the kitchen. In the kitchen, he was blunt and cold. I want a divorce. I've met someone else. You're not the woman. I stood there numb, the pain from my surgery nothing compared to the pain in my chest. Divorce because of her, because of this? I touched the bandage on my chest, my voice rising. It's not just that you've changed. You're always so sad, so needy. I need someone vibrant, alive, not this, he gestured at me dismissively. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I have cancer, Mark. I had surgery. What did you expect? I pleaded. He shrugged. I don't know, but this isn't it. I've moved on, you should too. He handed me divorce papers, still warm from the printer. I want you out of the house. It's for the best. I looked at him, at the stranger he had become. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem. Figure it out, he replied coldly. I packed a bag, my hands shaking. Alex was at my parents', thankfully spared from this nightmare. As I left, I looked back at the house, the life, the man I had once loved. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, harsh reality. After the divorce, I moved in with my parents, a shadow of my former self. The betrayal, the surgery, the cancer, it all took its toll. But it was in those moments of despair that something unexpected happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, nursing a cup of coffee. The silence between us was comfortable. Dad broke it with a question that caught me off guard. Evelyn, remember when I said I was thinking of buying shares in Mark's company? He asked. I looked up, surprised. Yeah, I thought you were joking. He shook his head, a serious look in his eyes. I wasn't. I went through with it. I now own a significant portion of the company. I nearly dropped my cup. You what? He nodded. Yep. I used my investment savings. It's all legal and above board. I own 80% of the shares now. I was speechless. This was huge. Dad owned a majority of Mark's family company. It was the kind of twist you'd expect in a movie, not real life. But why, Dad? I managed to ask, still reeling from the shock. He took a sip of his coffee before answering, because no one messes with my daughter. Plus, it was a good investment opportunity. It's a solid company, despite Mark. A part of me was overwhelmed by his gesture, but another part, a part one thought was long buried, felt a spark. Revenge wasn't my style, but justice? That was a different story. Dad, what are you planning to do with those shares? I asked, curiosity piquing. He grinned. Well, that's up to you, Evelyn. You have the business acumen and the marketing knowledge. You could do a lot with this opportunity. Me, running the company that once belonged to Mark and his family? It was ludicrous, audacious, and thrilling, but I wasn't sure if I was up for it. I hesitated, doubt creeping in. Dad put his hand on mine, his eyes kind. You're stronger than you think, Evelyn. You've been through hell and back. This could be your chance to rise from the ashes, to show them who Evelyn is. The idea was crazy, but it was also empowering. For years, I'd been put down, made to feel small and insignificant. But now, I had the power to change that, to turn the tables. I spent the next few days thinking about it, weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking control of my life, about proving to myself that I was more than what Mark and his family thought of me. Finally, I made my decision. I was going to do it. I was going to take on the company and make it my own. It was a daunting thought, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose, a drive. Dad, I'll do it. I'll take over the company, I said, my voice steady and confident. Dad smiled, his eyes twinkling. I knew you would. I'll set up a meeting with the board. It's time they met the new majority shareholder. The day of the shareholders' meeting dawned, a day that would mark my foray into a world I had been shut out from for so long. I stood outside the company building, taking a deep breath. Inside, the board, along with Mark and his father, awaited the arrival of the new majority shareholder. They were in for a surprise. Dressed in my best suit, feeling more confident than I had in years, I pushed open the doors and walked into the boardroom. The looks on their faces were priceless. Evelyn, what are you doing here? Mark stammered, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling every pair of eyes on me. I'm the new majority shareholder. Thanks to my father's investment, I now own 80% of this company. There was a moment of stunned silence, then whispers broke out among the board members. John, Mark's father, was the first to recover. "This has to be some kind of joke," he said, his voice gruff. "No joke, John. I'm here to make some changes," I replied, my voice steady. Mark was still staring at me, his face pale. "Evelyn, this is crazy. You can't run a company," he protested. I smiled, a small, satisfied curve of my lips. "I think you'll find I'm more than capable. I have plans to increase profits and expand the company, plans that involve modernizing our approach and embracing digital marketing, something I suggested before and was laughed at." The board members were now listening intently. I laid out my plans, speaking with confidence and knowledge. I saw nods of approval, even a few impressed glances, as the meeting drew to a close. Mark approached me, a desperate look in his eyes. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out," he pleaded. I looked at him, the man who had belittled me, betrayed me, and thrown me away when I was at my lowest. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. You made your choice, and now I've made mine." He reached out, but I stepped back. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, give me a chance." I shook my head, my resolve firm. "It's too late for that, Mark. You showed me your true colors, and I've moved on." Leaving the boardroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had come a long way from the broken woman who left Mark's house with a bag and a broken heart. I had taken control of my life, my future. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. I took a moment to savor it, the beauty of a new beginning. "Here's to new beginnings," I whispered to myself, a smile playing on my lips. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel. Welcome to the Retaliation Realm channel. We hope you enjoy today's story. I remember the day everything began to change. It was a Tuesday morning, much like any other, except it wasn't. I was in the kitchen, trying to get breakfast ready for Alex, our 4-year-old, who was energetically running around. Mark was in the dining room, already buried in his phone, probably checking work emails. I met Mark at his family's company. I started in the marketing department while he was in finance. We hit it off at a company picnic. 2 years later, we were married. I thought it was love, but after the wedding, things changed. Mark and his family insisted I become a housewife. "It's for the best," they said. I didn't realize then that it was the beginning of losing myself. "Mommy, I want pancakes." Alex's voice cut through my thoughts. "Coming right up, honey," I replied, flipping a pancake on the skillet. Mark's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the morning air. "Evelyn, are you going to take all day? I have an important meeting." "Sorry, just finishing up here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The clatter of plates as I set them on the table seemed louder than usual. Mark barely glanced at the breakfast. "This bacon is undercooked," he muttered, pushing the plate away. I felt a sting in my chest, but I swallowed it down. "I'll make a note of it for next time," I said, plastering a smile on my face. Alex, oblivious to the tension, chattered away about his toy cars. I envied his innocence. Mark's mother, Helen, chose that moment to make her grand entrance, as if on cue. "Evelyn, darling, let me show you how to cook bacon properly. Mark likes it crispy." I watched as she took over my kitchen, my home, my life. Helen had always been the matriarch, overseeing everything with a critical eye, and there I was, her project. You have to let it cook on low heat for longer. You'd know if you paid more attention, Helen said, flipping the bacon with an air of superiority. Mark nodded in agreement, not meeting my eyes. Mom knows best, he said. I bit back a retort, focusing on Alex's bright smile as he munched on his pancakes. As they left the kitchen, Helen wore a satisfied smile, and Mark remained glued to his phone. I stood there amidst the sizzling pans and the half-eaten breakfast, feeling more alone than ever. As days turned into weeks, the distance between Mark and me grew. It was like living with a stranger. He came home late, left early, and we barely spoke. I tried to bridge the gap, but it was like talking to a wall. One evening, I decided to make his favorite spaghetti dish. I spent hours in the kitchen, hoping it would bring back a spark, anything. I set the table, lit candles, and even put on some music, the kind we used to dance to. When Mark finally came home, he didn't even notice the effort. He just slumped into his chair, eyes fixed on his phone. "What's this?" he asked, poking at the spaghetti. "I thought I'd make your favorite," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a bite and grimaced. "It's too salty." "Didn't you taste it?" I felt a lump in my throat. "I thought it was okay," I stammered. He pushed the plate away. "I'm not eating this. I'll order a pizza." My heart sank as I cleared the untouched food. It felt like I was throwing away more than just spaghetti. Alex, bless his soul, tried to lighten the mood. "Mommy, can I have pizza too?" "Of course, sweetie, of course," I managed to smile for him, but the silence that followed was deafening. Mark ate his pizza, eyes glued to the TV, while I picked at my food. The gap between us felt like a chasm. The next day was no different. I was folding laundry when Mark walked in, his face like a thundercloud. "Can't you do something about all this mess?" he snapped, kicking at a toy car Alex had left on the floor. I tried to keep up, but with Alex, it's a bit challenging, I replied, my patience wearing thin. "Well, try harder." "It's not rocket science to keep a house clean," he retorted, not even looking at me. I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'm doing my best, Mark." "Your best isn't good enough," he muttered, storming off to his office, the spare room he had taken over. It was like this every day. The man I married, who used to make me laugh, who used to listen, was gone. In his place was this cold, indifferent person I barely recognized. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Mark's breathing, I realized how alone I felt. The man lying next to me might as well have been a million miles away. I missed the warmth, the love, the connection we once had. But most of all, I missed the man I thought I married. And in the darkness, a thought crept into my mind, maybe this was the beginning of the end. Things took a sharp turn when Mark got promoted to head of the family company. It was as if that title flipped a switch in him. He started coming home even later, sometimes not at all. When he was home, it was like living with a king who thought his castle wasn't good enough. One evening, he swaggered in, reeking of expensive cologne and self-importance. "Evelyn, we need to talk about your appearance," he said, eyeing me like I was a piece of outdated furniture. I was taken aback by his suggestion. "What about it?" He sighed as if explaining something to a child. "You've let yourself go. It's embarrassing. I'm the head of a major company now. I can't have you looking like this," he said, his words making my cheeks burn. "I'm taking care of Alex and the house. I don't exactly have time for a beauty routine," I replied. He rolled his eyes. "Excuses. If you cared enough, you'd find the time. Get a gym membership, do something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So it's all about appearances for you now? What happened to love me for who I am?" He scoffed. "That was before I realized I could do better. Shape up, Evelyn, or I might have to make some changes." I was speechless. The man I'd loved, the father of my child, was telling me I wasn't good enough for him anymore. I felt like I was drowning, and he was the water. The next day, I tried to talk to him about it, hoping he had been in a bad mood and didn't mean it. He was in the kitchen, sipping his expensive coffee, scrolling through his phone. "Mark, about last night. I think we need to talk," I started, my hands trembling. "Not now, Evelyn. I have a meeting," he dismissed. "But this is important." "You hurt me," I insisted. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold. I said what needed to be said. "You're the one who needs to change, not me." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. "You used to love me the way I was." He snorted. "That was before I realized my worth." "You should too." I walked away, feeling a piece of my heart break off. The man I'd married was gone, in his place was this stranger who judged me, who made me feel small and worthless. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the silence of the house, I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay and wither away under his contempt, or I could leave and try to find myself again. It was a terrifying thought, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could be strong enough to start again. It was at one of those overly formal family dinners that I felt the full weight of being disregarded. The dinner table was set like something out of a magazine, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. Mark and his father, John, were absorbed in discussing the family business. I sat there, a silent observer, my presence seemingly forgotten. "The quarterly reports need serious attention. Sales must pick up," John stated, his voice firm and businesslike. Mark was quick to respond. "We're considering expanding our marketing, maybe even breaking into new international markets." Hearing this, I couldn't help but speak up. Marketing was my turf, my passion before I was reduced to just a housewife. "Have you thought about leveraging digital marketing? Social media platforms could be a great way to widen your reach," I suggested, a bit hesitantly. There was a pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, to my dismay, John burst into laughter. "Social media, really, Evelyn? It's endearing that you want to help, but let's leave the business talk to us, shall we?" Mark joined in with a patronizing chuckle. "Keep to what you're good at, Evelyn. Let us handle the business." I felt a flush of embarrassment and anger. I have a background in marketing. "My suggestions are valid," I retorted, a little more sharply. John dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "That was years ago, dear. You're out of touch. You have other responsibilities now." The rest of the dinner went by in a blur of humiliation and anger. Their words stung, belittling not just my ideas, but my very identity. Later, needing some solace and support, I went to see my dad. He had always been my pillar of strength, the one who always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. "Dad, they just brushed me off like I don't matter," I said, my voice tinged with frustration and hurt. "Evelyn, I've always told you about Mark and his family's nature," Dad replied, his tone a mix of concern and a hint of, "I told you so." "I know, Dad, but I didn't expect it to be this bad." "They treat me as if I'm invisible," I admitted, feeling defeated. "Evelyn, you're not invisible, you're smart and capable. Don't let them diminish you," he encouraged, his voice firm. "But I feel trapped, Dad. I don't know what to do," I confessed, feeling a sense of despair. That's when Dad surprised me. "What if we shake things up a bit? I've got some money set aside from some successful investments. How about I buy shares in Mark's family company?" I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "You're joking, right?" "No, I'm serious. It's high time someone showed them you're not to be underestimated," Dad said. I laughed despite the situation. The thought of my dad, the outsider, getting involved in their precious family business was absurd yet strangely satisfying. Life as I knew it came crashing down one ordinary Tuesday. I had been feeling under the weather for a while, but I brushed it off as stress or fatigue. It wasn't until I found a lump that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doctor's appointment was supposed to be routine, but it wasn't. Sitting in the sterile doctor's office, the words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, but it's breast cancer. We caught it early, but you'll need immediate treatment," the doctor said. I sat there numb. Cancer? Me? It couldn't be, but the doctor's solemn face told me it was all too real. I have a son and a family. What? What are my options? My voice sounded distant, even to my ears. "We'll discuss treatment plans, but we must start soon," the doctor said gently. I walked home in a daze. How do I tell Mark? How do I tell Alex? My mind was a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Mark was in the living room when I got home, glued to his laptop as usual. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced up, annoyed. "What now, Evelyn? Can't you see I'm busy?" I took a deep breath. "It's serious. I went to the doctor today. I have breast cancer." For a moment, there was silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Cancer, great. Just what I needed, more drama." I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. "Mark, did you hear what I said?" "I have cancer," I repeated. He sighed, closing his laptop with a snap. "Yeah, I heard you. So what? Does this mean more doctor visits? How is this going to affect me and the company?" I was speechless. How could he be so callous? "It means I need treatment, Mark. I need support." He stood up, pacing the room. "Well, you better get it sorted quickly. I can't have you slacking off on housework and taking care of Alex." I felt like I was in some nightmare. "Is that all you care about? The house, the work? What about me?" He stopped, looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. "Look, Evelyn, it's not that I don't care, but you have to understand, the timing is terrible. We have a business to run." The rest of the conversation was a blur. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I was alone, truly alone in this. The following weeks were a whirlwind of appointments, treatments, and overwhelming fatigue. I tried to keep up with the house and Alex, but it was too much. Mark's patience wore thin. One evening, after a particularly grueling treatment, I was too exhausted to cook. "Mark, can we order in tonight?" "I'm just not up to it," I pleaded. He scoffed. "Order in again? What do I keep you around for if you can't even cook a simple meal?" It was a crushing blow, not just to my body, but to my heart. The day of my surgery loomed over me like a dark cloud. I was scared, not just of the surgery itself, but of what life would be like after. I would wake up less of a woman, or so I felt. My body, once a source of pride, was now a traitor. I didn't expect Mark to hold my hand and tell me everything would be okay, those days were long gone, but I did hope for a semblance of support. Instead, what I got was indifference. As I was getting ready for the hospital, Mark was busy getting dressed for work. "You'll be fine, right? The doctors know what they're doing," he said, not even looking at me. "Yeah, I guess," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused his hand on the door handle. "Call me when it's done. I've got an important meeting, can't miss it." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Sure, I'll call." The surgery was a blur, but waking up was worse. I felt a void where part of me used to be. My parents were there when I opened my eyes, their faces etched with concern and love. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "We're here, sweetheart, we're here," Mom said, taking my hand. Mark didn't show up. Not that day or the next. He didn't even call. It was as if my surgery, my cancer, was a minor inconvenience best kept out of sight, out of mind. Recovery was slow and painful, but eventually, I was allowed to go home. I dreaded it, not knowing what to expect from Mark. I arrived home to a shock. Mark wasn't alone. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, was in my living room. She was laughing at something he said, familiarly touching his arm. "Mark, what's going on?" My voice was a croak, still weak from the surgery. He looked up, surprised, and then his expression hardened. "Evelyn, let's talk in the kitchen." In the kitchen, he was blunt and cold. "I want a divorce. I've met someone else." You're not the woman." I stood there numb, the pain from my surgery nothing compared to the pain in my chest. Divorce because of her, because of this? I touched the bandage on my chest, my voice rising. "It's not just that you've changed. You're always so sad, so needy. I need someone vibrant, alive, not this." He gestured at me dismissively. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I have cancer, Mark. I had surgery. What did you expect?" I pleaded. He shrugged. "I don't know, but this isn't it. I've moved on, you should too." He handed me divorce papers, still warm from the printer. "I want you out of the house. It's for the best." I looked at him, at the stranger he had become. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem." "Figure it out," he replied coldly. I packed a bag, my hands shaking. Alex was at my parents', thankfully spared from this nightmare. As I left, I looked back at the house, the life, the man I had once loved. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, harsh reality. After the divorce, I moved in with my parents, a shadow of my former self. The betrayal, the surgery, the cancer, it all took its toll. But it was in those moments of despair that something unexpected happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, nursing a cup of coffee. The silence between us was comfortable. Dad broke it with a question that caught me off guard. "Evelyn, remember when I said I was thinking of buying shares in Mark's company?" he asked. I looked up, surprised. "Yeah, I thought you were joking." He shook his head, a serious look in his eyes. "I wasn't. I went through with it. I now own a significant portion of the company." I nearly dropped my cup. "You what?" He nodded. "Yep. I used my investment savings. It's all legal and above board. I own 80% of the shares now." I was speechless. This was huge. Dad owned a majority of Mark's family company. It was the kind of twist you'd expect in a movie, not real life. "But why, Dad?" I managed to ask, still reeling from the shock. He took a sip of his coffee before answering, "Because no one messes with my daughter. Plus, it was a good investment opportunity. It's a solid company, despite Mark." A part of me was overwhelmed by his gesture, but another part, a part one thought was long buried, felt a spark. Revenge wasn't my style, but justice? That was a different story. "Dad, what are you planning to do with those shares?" I asked, curiosity piquing. He grinned. "Well, that's up to you, Evelyn. You have the business acumen and the marketing knowledge. You could do a lot with this opportunity." Me, running the company that once belonged to Mark and his family? It was ludicrous, audacious, and thrilling, but I wasn't sure if I was up for it. I hesitated, doubt creeping in. Dad put his hand on mine, his eyes kind. "You're stronger than you think, Evelyn. You've been through hell and back. This could be your chance to rise from the ashes, to show them who Evelyn is." The idea was crazy, but it was also empowering. For years, I'd been put down, made to feel small and insignificant. But now, I had the power to change that, to turn the tables. I spent the next few days thinking about it, weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking control of my life, about proving to myself that I was more than what Mark and his family thought of me. Finally, I made my decision. I was going to do it. I was going to take on the company and make it my own. It was a daunting thought, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose, a drive. "Dad, I'll do it. I'll take over the company," I said, my voice steady and confident. Dad smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I knew you would. I'll set up a meeting with the board." It's time they met the new majority shareholder. The day of the shareholders' meeting dawned, a day that would mark my foray into a world I had been shut out from for so long. I stood outside the company building, taking a deep breath. Inside, the board, along with Mark and his father, awaited the arrival of the new majority shareholder. They were in for a surprise. Dressed in my best suit, feeling more confident than I had in years, I pushed open the doors and walked into the boardroom. The looks on their faces were priceless. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" Mark stammered, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling every pair of eyes on me. "I'm the new majority shareholder. Thanks to my father's investment, I now own 80% of this company." There was a moment of stunned silence, then whispers broke out among the board members. John, Mark's father, was the first to recover. "This has to be some kind of joke," he said, his voice gruff. "No joke, John. I'm here to make some changes," I replied, my voice steady. Mark was still staring at me, his face pale. "Evelyn, this is crazy. You can't run a company," he protested. I smiled, a small, satisfied curve of my lips. "I think you'll find I'm more than capable. I have plans to increase profits and expand the company, plans that involve modernizing our approach and embracing digital marketing, something I suggested before and was laughed at." The board members were now listening intently. I laid out my plans, speaking with confidence and knowledge. I saw nods of approval, even a few impressed glances, as the meeting drew to a close. Mark approached me, a desperate look in his eyes. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out," he pleaded. I looked at him, the man who had belittled me, betrayed me, and thrown me away when I was at my lowest. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. You made your choice, and now I've made mine." He reached out, but I stepped back. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, give me a chance." I shook my head, my resolve firm. "It's too late for that, Mark. You showed me your true colors, and I've moved on." Leaving the boardroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had come a long way from the broken woman who left Mark's house with a bag and a broken heart. I had taken control of my life, my future. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. I took a moment to savor it, the beauty of a new beginning. "Here's to new beginnings," I whispered to myself, a smile playing on my lips. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel.
I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway. There was an unfamiliar silver Mercedes parked where I usually leave my car, forcing me to park on the street. As I walked up the path to my grandmother's Victorian house, my house now, I could hear furniture being dragged across hardwood floors. My name is Marlo, and until today, I thought I had finally found my peace. It had been 6 months since Gran passed and left me her beloved home, and 3 months since Ethan and I moved in together. But apparently, the universe had other plans. I unlocked the front door with trembling hands and stepped into chaos. My mother-in-law Lorraine stood in the middle of my living room, directing her husband Harold like an orchestra conductor as he pushed my grandmother's antique settee across the floor. "Oh, good, you're home early," Lorraine said without looking at me, her voice sharp as cut glass. "This room is absolutely dreadful. The feng shui is all wrong. Harold, move that settee to the bay window." I stood frozen in the doorway, watching as they systematically dismantled the room I'd preserved exactly as Gran had left it. The settee where she used to read to me as a child. The hand-knotted Persian rug she'd brought back from her travels. Even the family photos were being reorganized on the walls. "Where's Ethan?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "He gave us his key," Harold mumbled apologetically, still pushing furniture. "Said we could surprise you with a makeover." "Surprise," Lorraine added with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Really, dear, you can't expect to raise a family in such an outdated space. We're doing you a favor." My chest tightened. Raise a family? Ethan and I hadn't even discussed children yet. I watched as Lorraine picked up one of Gran's hand-painted vases, examining it with obvious distaste. "Please put that down," I said quietly. "It's very special to me." "Oh, don't be so precious about these old things," Lorraine replied, setting the vase aside with deliberate casualness. "Change is good for you. You'll thank me later." I pulled out my phone and texted Ethan, "Your parents are here. We need to talk." His response came quickly, "Sorry, stuck at work." Whatever Mom suggests, just go with it. Easier that way. I looked up from my phone to see Lorraine watching me with that same calculating smile. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about furniture. This was a power play, and my mother-in-law had just made her first move. The question was, what would be mine? 3 days after the living room invasion, I decided to host a dinner party. Not because I wanted to, God knows I'd rather eat glass, but because Gran always said the best way to handle difficult people was to kill them with kindness. Though watching Lorraine inspect her water glass for spots, I was starting to question Gran's wisdom. "I noticed you kept all the old furniture," Lorraine said, running a finger along the edge of my grandmother's mahogany dining table. "Though I suppose some people find vintage charming." Ethan cleared his throat but kept his eyes on his plate. Harold, sitting beside him, seemed fascinated by his green beans. "It's not vintage, it's an heirloom," I replied, forcing a smile. "Speaking of which, I'd love to hear stories about your family pieces, Lorraine. What did your mother pass down to you?" The fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a split second, something flickered across her face, pain, maybe, but it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "We're not sentimental about objects," she said crisply. "Ethan, darling, have you told Marlo about the lovely new development we discussed?" My husband's shoulders tensed. "Mom, not now. The Riverside property," she continued, ignoring him. "Perfect for a growing family. Much more suitable than this. Historical residence." I set down my wine glass harder than intended. "What Riverside property?" "Just a potential investment opportunity," Ethan mumbled. "Nothing definite." "Your father and I took him to see it last weekend," Lorraine added. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, excellent school district. "We've already spoken to our realtor friend about making an offer." The room tilted slightly. "Last weekend?" When Ethan said he was working late. "Excuse me," I managed, standing up. "I need to check on dessert." In the kitchen, I gripped the counter, trying to steady my breathing. Behind me, I heard footsteps, too heavy to be Lorraine's. "I'm sorry," Harold said quietly. "She means well, in her way." I turned to face my father-in-law. "Does she?" "Because it feels like she's trying to erase everything that matters to me." He fidgeted with his wedding ring. "Lorraine. She's afraid of becoming irrelevant." When her own mother-in-law. He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself. "Just try to understand." Before I could press him further, Lorraine's voice rang out from the dining room. "Harold, come help me show Ethan those paint swatches I brought for the nursery." I watched Harold shuffle back to his wife, carrying what felt like the weight of unspoken secrets. What had he been about to say about Lorraine's mother-in-law? And why did I have the feeling that this dinner was just the beginning of a much bigger storm? After the disastrous dinner party, I found myself in Gran's study, seeking comfort in the familiar scent of old books and leather. The room was my sanctuary, the one place Lorraine hadn't managed to improve yet. I ran my fingers along the spines of Gran's beloved novels, stopping at a worn copy of Jane Eyre that seemed oddly out of place. When I pulled it out, an envelope fluttered to the floor. The paper had yellowed with age, and my hands trembled as I recognized Gran's elegant handwriting, for Lorraine Baxter, never sent. I shouldn't have read it. But after the past week, I felt entitled to some answers. Lorraine, the letter began, I write this knowing you'll never change. 20 years ago, you drove your mother-in-law from her home with your improvements and your subtle cruelties. Now I watch you attempting the same with my granddaughter. But Marlowe is stronger than you know, and this house will never belong to you. My phone buzzed, Ethan calling, but I ignored it, my eyes glued to the page. The truth about Harold's mother's departure would destroy the image you've carefully constructed. Remember that before you push too far. The study door creaked open, making me jump. Harold stood there, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I thought I might find you here, he said quietly. That letter. I've been waiting years for someone to find it. What happened to your mother? He sank into Gran's armchair, shoulders heavy. Lorraine told everyone Mom moved to Florida willingly. The truth is, she drove her away with constant criticism, rearranging her home, making decisions about our lives. Sound familiar? Why didn't you stop it? The same reason Ethan doesn't stop it now. He met my eyes. Cowardice. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Lorraine, coming by tomorrow to discuss nursery colors. Already ordered the wallpaper. Ethan agreed it's perfect. I looked at Harold, really looked at him, this broken man who'd spent decades watching history repeat itself. I'm not leaving, I said firmly. This ends with me. He nodded slowly. Be careful, Lorraine, when she feels threatened. He trailed off as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Harold? Lorraine's voice carried through the door. The car's running. He stood, hesitating. Your grandmother tried to warn us all. Don't let her letter be in vain. As I watched him shuffle out, I clutched Gran's letter like a shield. Lorraine wanted a war? Fine. But this time, she'd picked the wrong house and the wrong woman to try to control. She wants you to quit your job? Clara nearly spilled her coffee across the cafe table. Please tell me you're not considering it. I pushed my untouched muffin around its plate. Lorraine says it's about focusing on family priorities. She's already lined up 3 interviews with her friends' daycares. For a baby that doesn't exist yet? Clara's eyes narrowed. What does Ethan say about all this? Before I could answer, my phone lit up with Lorraine's name. I silenced it, but not before catching her text. Canceled your appointment with that awful career counselor. Lunch instead? How did she even know about that? I whispered, more to myself than Clara. The career counselor had been my secret hope for finding a better position at a larger firm. She's monitoring your calendar, isn't she? Clara leaned forward. The shared family one Ethan insisted you join? My stomach dropped. Of course. The calendar Ethan had pressed me to use, just for family stuff. I'd thought it was sweet at the time, him wanting to be more organized. Now I wondered whose idea it really was. I can't keep living like this, I said, pulling out my laptop. Watch this. I opened my work email, started typing a resignation letter. Clara grabbed my wrist. Don't you dare, she said. That's exactly what she wants. Your grandmother didn't leave you that house so you could let another Lorraine win. Another Lorraine? A new voice made us both jump. Harold stood beside our table, looking uncomfortable in his casual weekend clothes. Harold? What are you doing here? Getting coffee. He gestured vaguely toward the counter, then hesitated. Mind if I nodded, and he slid into the empty chair. I heard what you said about another Lorraine, he said quietly. You found the letter, didn't you? About my mother. Clara shot me a questioning look, but I kept my eyes on Harold. Why are you here, Harold? Really? He pulled out an envelope, placed it carefully between our coffee cups. Because history doesn't have to repeat itself. These are papers from when my mother sold her house, to Lorraine's name only. There's something you need to see about the terms. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. Mom says you're not answering. We need to talk about the house. She has some ideas about the deed. I looked at Harold's envelope, then at my phone, pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. This wasn't just about controlling my life. Lorraine wanted my house, my grandmother's house, and she was using Ethan to get it. "Show me everything," I said to Harold, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Every last detail. The annual Baxter family brunch was in full swing, our backyard filled with relatives I barely knew, all circling like vultures as Lorraine held court by the mimosa station. I'd spent the morning rearranging furniture back to its proper place after her latest attempt, my hands still shaking with quiet rage. "Everyone," Lorraine clinked her glass. "I have an announcement." My stomach clenched. Beside me, Harold wouldn't meet my eyes. "As you know, Ethan and Marlo have been blessed with this lovely historic home," she began, her smile sharp as broken glass. "And since they'll be starting a family soon, we've decided it's time for some major renovations." I nearly dropped my plate. "We've decided?" "The contractors start Monday," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "We're thinking of converting that dusty old study into a proper nursery. No need for all those books taking up space. The study, grand sanctuary," where her letters still sat hidden in Jane Eyre. "No." The word came out louder than I intended. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. "Excuse me?" Lorraine's voice dropped dangerously low. I said no. I stepped forward, feeling dozens of eyes on me. "You don't get to decide anything about this house. Not the study, not the furniture, not my future children." "Marlo," Ethan warned, reaching for my arm. I shook him off. "Tell them, Lorraine. Tell them what you did to Harold's mother's house. Tell them why she really moved to Florida." The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're... Or should we discuss the deed transfer papers you're trying to pressure Ethan into signing? The ones Harold showed me?" A glass shattered somewhere. Harold stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair. "You're making a scene," Lorraine hissed. "This is hardly the behavior of someone capable of maintaining a household of this caliber. Perhaps if you focus less on your career and more on proper family values." "Proper family values?" I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. "Like manipulating your son? Driving away anyone who stands up to you? This ends now, Lorraine. This is my house. My life. And you're not welcome in either anymore." "Ethan," she snapped. "Control your wife." But when I turned to look at my husband, he was already walking away, disappearing into the house without a word. The silence that followed was deafening. Lorraine's face twisted into something almost pitying. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose we all see who's really destroying this family." As relatives began awkwardly gathering their things, I stood my ground, Gran's words from her letter echoing in my mind. "Marlo is stronger than you know." I just hoped she was right. I found Ethan in our bedroom, methodically packing a suitcase. The party's voices still drifted up from the backyard, but they felt distant, like sounds from another world. "So that's it?" I asked, watching him fold his shirts with mechanical precision. "You're choosing her?" "I'm choosing peace," he replied without looking up. "Maybe if you'd tried harder to understand Mom's perspective." "Understand?" I grabbed the deed transfer papers from my dresser, throwing them onto his perfectly folded clothes. "Like how you understood when you agreed to sign over my house to her?" That made him pause. "It wasn't like that. She just wanted to protect the family's interests." "The family's interests?" My laugh sounded hollow. "Tell that to Harold's mother. Tell that to Gran, who knew exactly what Lorraine was capable of." "You don't know everything, Marlo." His voice hardened. "Mom's been through things you can't understand." "Then help me understand, Ethan. For once in your life, stand up and tell the truth." He zipped his suitcase closed, the sound final as a coffin lid. "The truth is, you're the one who's torn this family apart. Not Mom. You." The words hit like a physical blow. As he brushed past me, I grabbed his arm. "Where are you going?" "To my parents. Mom's already called a lawyer about the house." He finally met my eyes. "It's over, Marlo. You've lost." After he left, I stood in our bedroom, my bedroom now, listening to his car start up and drive away. My phone buzzed with a text from Lorraine. The contractors will still arrive Monday. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I walked downstairs in a daze, finding Harold still sitting alone in the empty backyard. He looked up as I approached, his eyes full of decades of regret. I tried to warn you, he said softly. Why didn't you ever stand up to her? The same reason Ethan won't. Sometimes it's easier to surrender than fight a war you can't win. He stood slowly. Lorraine. She doesn't just take houses, Marlo. She takes pieces of your soul until there's nothing left to fight with. As he walked away, I noticed something on the table, the key to their house. The one they'd given us for emergencies. Beside it lay a small notebook I recognized from Harold's desk. I picked up both, my hands trembling. The notebook fell open to a recent entry. The truth about what really happened to Mother is in the attic boxes. I should have spoken up years ago. Maybe now. Looking at my grandmother's house, my house, I realized this wasn't just about protecting a building anymore. It was about breaking a cycle that had destroyed too many lives already. I clutched the key tighter. Lorraine wanted a war? Fine. But first, I needed to know exactly what kind of enemy I was fighting. The Baxter's attic was a maze of cardboard boxes and forgotten memories. Using Harold's key to break in felt wrong, but I was past caring about right and wrong. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Ethan and a text from Lorraine. The movers arrive tomorrow. Don't make me involve the police. I was halfway through another dusty box when I found it, a false bottom hiding a stack of yellowed papers. Hospital records. Court documents. Letters. I wondered when you'd come looking. I spun around. Lorraine stood in the attic doorway, her silhouette sharp against the dim light. Your mother-in-law, I said, holding up the papers. She didn't move to Florida. She was committed to a psychiatric facility. She was unstable. Lorraine stepped closer, refusing to accept change, causing scenes. Rather like you, because you gaslight her, made her think she was losing her mind when she tried to protect her home. My hands shook as I read from the admission papers. Patient exhibits paranoid behavior, claims daughter-in-law is systematically destroying her life. I protected this family, Lorraine snapped. Harold's mother was weak. Ethan's chosen someone equally weak. History repeats itself. Is that what you tell yourself? That destroying people is protection. Something flickered across her face, pain, maybe even fear. You don't understand. My own mother-in-law took everything from me. My home, my voice, my dignity. I swore I'd never be powerless again. So you became her? Destroying other women to feel strong? I became a survivor. She reached for the papers, but I stepped back. Give those to me. No. I pulled out my phone, showed her the recording icon. It's over, Lorraine. Harold's confession about his mother, your admission just now, it's all here. Try to take my house and these records go public. She went very still. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? You taught me well, survival at any cost, right? For a moment, I saw something crack in her perfect facade. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a hollow, tired sound. You're right, she said quietly. I did become her. And now you're becoming me. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. I looked down at the papers in my hands, at the evidence of lives destroyed by fear and control, and made my decision. I deleted the recording. I'm not becoming you, I said, holding out the papers. Because I'm choosing to break the cycle. Take them. But stay away from my home and get help, Lorraine. Before you lose everyone who matters. As I walked away, leaving her alone in the attic with her secrets, I felt lighter. Sometimes the best revenge isn't winning the war, it's refusing to fight it in the first place. A month after the attic confrontation, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a familiar key and a letter in Lorraine's precise handwriting. I've started therapy. Harold's mother is being transferred to a facility closer to home. Some cycles are meant to be broken. I was replanting Gran's roses when Ethan pulled into the driveway. He looked different, older somehow, or maybe just more present. The divorce papers are signed, he said, staying by his car. I've been seeing someone too. A therapist, I mean. Trying to understand why I never learned to stand up for anything. I nodded, continuing to work the soil. Good. Mom's different, he added quietly. Dad says she's actually talking about her own mother-in-law now. About patterns and trauma and, well, everything she never faced before. The autumn air carried the scent of earth and dying leaves. In the study window above us, I could see the reflection of Gran's reading lamp, still burning where it always had. I'm not coming back, Ethan said suddenly. I need to learn who I am without everyone else's expectations. But I wanted you to know you were right to fight. For this house, for yourself. I'm sorry I never fought beside you. After he left, I went up to Gran's study. The contractors never came, and Lorraine's lawyers never called. The room remained exactly as it had been, filled with books and memories and quiet strength. On Gran's desk, I found one last surprise, a journal I'd never seen before, bookmarked with a faded photograph. It showed a young woman standing proudly in front of this very house, her face bright with determination. On the back was written, "To my granddaughter Marlowe, remember, a home is not just walls and windows. It's the courage to protect what matters, and the wisdom to know when to let go. Some battles are won not by fighting, but by breaking the chains that bind us to old wounds." The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Clara holding up takeout bags and wine. Behind her, surprisingly, stood Harold, clutching what looked like old photo albums. I took one last look at Gran's photo before heading downstairs. The house felt different now, not just mine, but a sanctuary for healing, for breaking cycles, for new beginnings. As I opened the door to my unexpected guests, I remembered Lorraine's words in the attic. History repeats itself. Maybe she was right. But not in the way she'd thought. Sometimes history repeats to give us a chance to write a better ending. And this time, we all chose differently.
My husband, Jack, made Andy Primarch after receiving his inheritance. "I don't need a life with you anymore," he said. "I'm inheriting $5 million. I don't need you when I have that money." His cold words suggested the end of our marriage after a long period of living together. I felt like a mere obstacle, but he didn't know yet the significant secret associated with the $5 million inheritance. "Mom, is it true that Grandpa is in critical condition?" I was taken aback by my daughter Sophie's unexpected question. Supposedly, the serious health problem of Ethan, who is Jack's father, was a secret between Jack and me. "Did you get that information from your dad? The only one who might have told Sophie is Jack." "Yes, and on a call from Dad, he told me to renounce Grandpa's inheritance," Sophie said. Her words unsettled me, and because of this single phone call, my peaceful life was about to be shaken. A few days after the call with Sophie, Ethan passed away peacefully. Since getting married, I've lived with Jack's parents, and I've never hesitated to support them when their health worsened. It's been 5 years since Jack's mother passed away, and now we received the news of Ethan's passing. The funeral went smoothly, but the moment I thought I was free from the tension, my husband's behavior changed dramatically. "What are you doing here? Why hasn't it been cleaned properly lately?" Jack frequently points out minor dust and small stains. "I'm sorry, I must have missed it. I'll clean it right now." "This place isn't cleaned well either. Do you clean every day?" "Of course I clean with the same routine as always." Even though I cleaned just as always, I couldn't understand why Jack was so angry, but it seemed the issue wasn't just about cleaning. "Why are you serving this? I wish you'd pay more attention to the taste when you cook. It's hard when the dishes I put effort into are criticized one by one. Even the dishes he used to enjoy are now unappreciated. Is there something bothering you lately?" I plucked up the courage to ask, but it seemed to worsen his mood. "It's useless to deny it. To be honest, the food you make isn't good. I've been tolerating it because my parents never complained, but I've always felt its tastelessness." Jack's words pierced my heart coldly and sharply. It was the first time he had ever criticized me so severely. I knew when Jack was this upset, Anything I said would only fan the flames. My mom always cleaned and did laundry perfectly, and at mealtimes she cooked with care without cutting corners. You're nothing like her. I've been patient, but I can't stand it any longer. This was the first time he compared me to his mother and criticized me. All I could do was reflect deeply on myself. I'm truly sorry. I couldn't have imagined that he valued my cooking so little. Jack always used to smile and say, "It's delicious," when eating. When we first got married, his mother gave me cooking advice. To think he has always found my cooking tasteless. Tears started to flow uncontrollably. "Do you think anything will change if you cry? Your tears mean nothing now. Don't show them to me." Lately, everything just feels so tedious. After saying those words, Jack suddenly stood up and left the house, slamming the door behind him as he walked away. "Jack, where are you going? Come back." But it seemed he didn't hear me. My mind was in turmoil, unable to keep up with this sudden change, unable to understand what had just happened. Until a few months ago, we were a couple who shared everything, holding hands. We shared the small joys of daily life and tackled minor grievances together. I couldn't understand why we had become so distant, and then I remembered the content of the call from Sophie. It's about Ethan's inheritance. There was a hint of hesitation in Sophie's voice that night. Jack came home much later than usual, and I missed the opportunity to ask him about it. Was there something going on? Maybe Jack found out some information about the inheritance and wanted to keep it to himself. I tried to approach Sophie. I wonder why they're discussing inheritance while Grandpa is still in good health. She had expressed doubts about Jack and said she had conveyed the same to him. If the way the inheritance is divided doesn't change, it will all fall into my hands. Considering Sophie, I believe this is the best way. Recalling Jack's recent cold behavior towards Sophie, doubts crossed my mind. If he intends to take all the inheritance and abandon me, this thought tightened my chest, and tears again welled up in my eyes. In my pain, I became keenly aware of the sounds around me. Just as the room became eerily silent, the sudden ring of the phone echoed throughout. I didn't feel up to answering, but it could be important. Checking the caller ID, I saw Jack's name, the same Jack who had left the house earlier. Picking up felt tiresome, but I also didn't want to face any backlash for ignoring it, so I hesitantly answered. "What are you doing? Don't keep me waiting. I'm running out of time." His sudden authoritative tone took me by surprise. He was indeed stubborn at times, but he wasn't someone who would yell without a reason in the past. Shocked by his changed demeanor, I let out a slight sigh, hoping he wouldn't notice. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" "I have something to talk about. I'll be home soon. Stay home and wait for me." Lately, his voice sounded unmistakably colder than before. I replied with a brief, "Okay," and promptly hung up. Looking at the clock, more than 3 hours had already passed since Jack went out. I had been crying, so overwhelmed with confusion and pain that I hadn't realized how much time had passed. After a while, I heard the door open and Jack's footsteps. A sweet scent of body wash, one we didn't use at home, wafted from him. That unfamiliar smell intensified the pain in my chest. "I'll be straight for work. I want to end our relationship. As a token of gratitude, I'll give you $220,000. His words were something I had feared deep down. Still facing this reality, the shock was so immense that I felt tears drying up. "I'm genuinely tired of you not managing things at home. I want to live peacefully in my old age." Linda had dreamt of a peaceful old age, however. The one who began to shatter that dream was none other than Jack. "Why are you?" Her words trailed off as she searched for what to say. Jack looked at her with a smug smile. At that moment, a bright ringtone from Jack's cell phone filled the room. The unfamiliar tone was different from his usual one. To Linda, it felt as if this unusual sound hinted at a communication from a specific individual. "I'm sorry, but I haven't finished my errands yet." Linda sensed a slight softness in Jack's voice, different from how he usually sounds towards her. It felt somewhat kinder and more intimate. Furthermore, the sweet scent of body wash in the room, the unique ringtone from earlier, and the changed tone of his voice, all these events hinted at something he might be hiding. "I knew it," Linda whispered so that Jack wouldn't hear. He had been too overt about his external affair. Considering the inheritance he might be getting soon, the alimony might be insignificant for him, even if his infidelity becomes evident. After ending his call, Jack looked down at Linda with emotionless, cold eyes. "My intentions haven't changed. I want you to sign this document. I'll contact you later. Make sure to have it signed by then. I don't plan to come back to this house. Remember, this house is now yours." Jack, without uttering another word or even looking at my face, headed towards the door. What did our long marital life of 40 years mean? A few days later, I found myself at a lawyer's office as I gathered information about Jack's actions and Ethan's inheritance and explained it to our daughter Sophie. Her complexion changed. It was painful to show our daughter our mistakes, but Sophie, out of love for me, let her emotions out and shed tears. Then she showed strong determination to confront Jack and introduced me to a lawyer to support us. Hello, I am Robinson. I will be handling your case. I will support you to the best of my ability." The woman named Robinson sitting across from me seemed to be in her late 40s, exuding a calm aura. Her neatly groomed hair and attire gave off a professional vibe. Her clear way of speaking provided me with a sense of reassurance. "I'm truly sorry for approaching you suddenly. My name is Lai Johnson. I'm a bit nervous since it's our first meeting under such circumstances." "That's all right. I have already received some information from Sophie. Sophie has briefed me on the overview, so I was able to talk in detail with peace of mind. Based on what I've researched over the days and the information Mrs. Robinson separately gathered for me, we verified the facts. My husband doesn't have any siblings, so if our daughter Sophie renounces the inheritance, the huge fortune, which amounts to about $5 million, will all go to my husband. Also, his affair with a woman named Jennifer began at a bar they happened to visit, and it seemed their relationship continued for about 6 months. She seemed quite different from me, and I was curious about what happened between her and my husband. Through a joint investigation with Mrs. Robinson, we were able to uncover an important fact that my husband might not yet know. Linda, how do you intend to proceed from here?" Mrs. Robinson asked me in a gentle tone and soft eyes. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I deeply appreciate it," I replied, smiling towards Mrs. Robinson. I handed over the fee for the procedures, and after a brief exchange with her, I quietly left the office. 5 days later, I received a call from Jack on my cell phone. He proposed a meeting in a quiet cafe. I arrived a bit earlier than our scheduled time. The cafe was surprisingly empty. The owner warmly welcomed me and suggested I pick any seat. I chose a seat by the window to enjoy the calm outside view. After a while, the entrance bell rang, and in my line of sight stood Jack and his new girlfriend, Jennifer. When Jack saw me, he smirked with a sense of pride. "Are you prepared for the divorce?" I was a bit surprised that this was his first statement. It seems he's convinced he's in full control. "Is this your new associate?" I hadn't expected him to bring her to such an important discussion, and I was astonished at his decision. I wondered if he was the man I once deeply loved. Has he changed because he cheated, or was he always like this? I can't tell. "You're Jack's wife, right? My name is Jennifer. I've recently started dating him," she said with a sudden smile. I couldn't quite grasp the meaning of her sudden smile. "I've heard a lot about you from Jack. Seeing you in person, you do look a bit aged. I wonder how Jack endured all these years. I feel a little sorry for him. Indeed, Jennifer seems to take great care of her appearance. She looks much younger than her actual age in her 60s. Compared to her, I might look my age, but I can't accept the way she phrased it. Jennifer, it's those tendencies of yours. I warned you about it, Jack interjected. But indeed, I did think that. But Jack, if it were me, I would cherish you more, I said softly. I know, Linda. I don't want you to overthink it anymore. I just want you to file the divorce papers. I was taken aback by Jack's expected attitude. Hold on. There's something I want to discuss, I said, noticing a hint of confusion on Jack's face. What are you getting at? Is it all about your father's inheritance? Is that why, after all our years of marriage, you're deciding this? I wanted to know the truth behind all these events. I can't see how my father's inheritance and you are related. That's solely my father's. I've heard detailed stories about your father's vast inheritance from Sophie. I know how much it's worth. So what? That inheritance isn't for you to take, but I'll answer. More than the inheritance itself, the end of taking care of my parents is one of the reasons I want to part with you. Just a caregiver role. How had Jack seen me only as a caregiver and not the loving wife I used to be? I don't even have the energy to cry. Can we speed this up, Jack? I want to start our new life. Besides, have you still not let go of Jack? Don't make me repeat myself. I'm not thinking of a new start with you now. I want you to file the divorce paper. Waves of emotion struck my heart with intense anger and deep sadness. My hand quivered slightly. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the divorce papers. But my name isn't written yet. The situation isn't settled yet. To hand it over, you remember promising me the house and money, right? I clearly remember when we talked about it. Yeah, I did say that. I'm a man of my word, so I plan to give you the house and money. You say you're kind, but a truly kind person wouldn't just use their wife as a mere caregiver and then abandon her. So I'm demanding rightful compensation of $30,000 in the rights to the house. What compensation? When we talked about money, it was supposed to be $20,000. You always nitpick at the very end. Your attitude of trying to pay me the absolute minimum is so obvious, but the difference of $10,000 means a lot to me, so I think $30,000 as compensation is fair. Your girlfriend, it's Jennifer, right. I thought of claiming from her too, but instead of that, I want to settle for $330,000, and I intend to sign the divorce papers right here in front of you. Jennifer reacted unexpectedly, first commenting that $30,000 should be fine. Jack, pay it if you're satisfied with it, she said. With Jennifer's statement, Jack finally accepted the alimony of $30,000. Now we need Jack's signature on the land title change document Mrs. Robinson prepared and the notarized alimony agreement. Jack looked surprised by my preparations. Still, I calmly said, I have a life to continue, and eased his suspicions. We took out our respective seals and lined up at the designated spot, and Jack smiled as if he anticipated something. So, Linda, will you sign the divorce papers right now? Understood. Here's the divorce paper. As I carefully wrote my name and firmly stamped it, Jack couldn't hold back his laughter and laughed out loud again. With this, you and I no longer have any relationship. Also, I have something to tell you. I'm set to inherit $5 million, so I didn't need someone like you. Thanks for the divorce. What a foolish ex-wife you had, letting go so easily for just $30,000. Jack's voice sneered behind me as I left, followed by the loud laughter of Jack and Jennifer echoing. I hurriedly left and headed to the city hall. My only goal now is to complete this procedure as quickly as possible and sever ties with the two of them completely. They might be laughing happily now, but I wondered how long their happiness would last. A month later, I quickly sold the house I received from Jack, prepared for a new life, and decided to live near my daughter Sophie, who planned to start her life near her husband's parents' home. Since Jack's mother lived nearby, I thought there would inevitably be moments I'd feel cautious, but contrary to my concerns, Sophie's husband warmly welcomed me and was always considerate, which I found very reassuring. My daughter Sophie seemed angry at Jack's actions at first, but when I told her a certain fact, her expression changed completely and she smiled brightly. I had a hunch that Jack would soon realize my plan. As proof, I deliberately didn't change my mobile number. The day that intuition became a reality came sooner than I thought. In the afternoon, my mobile rang repeatedly, and sure enough, it was Jack. He called many times, but at first I didn't answer. After receiving repeated calls, I finally picked up. "Hello? Why are you doing this?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "What's the matter? You called out of the blue." Jack raised his voice. "What's the problem? Where are you right now?" I thought he might have visited the house we used to live in, but in reality, that house had already been sold. "Since we've decided to divorce, there's no need for you to be involved anymore." "Where did Sophie go? I can't find her." It seems he went to Sophie's previous house. Of course she wasn't there, and I managed all the information and procedures related to Sophie's husband's family home, so Jack had no way of knowing. He seems to have hit a dead end and contacted me. "Yes, actually, Sophie has moved to a new place," I replied calmly. "Why didn't you tell me something so important? Moreover, did you know about that too?" Jack seemed to have finally realized the truth. "By that, are you referring to the significant hidden debt that Ethan had?" When I investigated Ethan's inheritance in detail, I was shocked by the amount of the inheritance, but at the same time, I found out about a considerable hidden debt. Probably while he was alive, he estimated he could repay the debt with about $5 million and hid that fact from us. However, he passed away midway through repayment, and the hidden debt was left neglected. And when you officially receive an inheritance, you are also obliged to inherit such hidden debts. Jack was blinded by the allure of easy money and neglected thorough verification and investigation. That was his big mistake. So I have a question. Did you know about my dad's debt? Information is easy to come by. It becomes clear to anyone with a little search. That's why I noticed it, I explained calmly. I could imagine Jack turning red with anger on the other end of the phone. "Anyway, what about the promised money? What about the money you intended to return?" Jack's real goal was money after all. "Besides, about that property, if I had known about my dad's debt from the beginning, I wouldn't have gotten involved at all." "I understand how you feel," Jack said, revealing his suspicions. I thought it deep down, but I chose not to say it. "But think about it. Putting aside the money issue for a moment, you got to marry a very attractive woman, right? Isn't that pretty lucky of you?" Of course, I don't know if Jennifer chose Jack because of his assets or if it was true love. As soon as Jennifer found out about my debt, she left me. I thought she would. "It's exactly as I expected," Jack confessed. "Think about it. How about starting over with me? I feel deceived by Jennifer. I just realized now you're the person I need." Jack's tone suddenly dropped and became emotional. "I wonder if he has forgotten everything he did to me," I thought to myself, feeling cornered. Every day I'm being rushed by collectors, and the debt I can't repay is piling up. I'm at my limit. I feel my life is in danger. "Help me, please," Jack pleaded desperately. Even after hearing his desperate plea, I calmly thought, if I were in this situation, would Jack help me? I'm living peacefully now and am truly satisfied in the days to come. I want to live in peace. You might have forgotten, but remember what was said in my response. I told Jack. For a moment, he was lost for words on the other end of the phone. "You mean back then?" he asked. "Yes, exactly, Jack. I'm grateful that we were able to get divorced." "Thank you for giving me a chance to choose a new path," I said firmly. I felt the tremor in Jack's voice and his tears, but for my future, I made up my mind and quietly ended the call. This marked the complete end of our relationship. I don't know how Jack's life is now or how he's repaying his debt, but I hope he's making an effort somewhere. I thought to myself as I contemplated the situation. Linda, how about taking a walk outside while looking at the beautiful scenery? Currently, I'm enjoying my days with a wonderful person I met through a hobby in Chicago. He's very warm and always with me. Spending time with him brings me unparalleled happiness. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.
I've come to a stark realization. Owen lacks any sense of responsibility or compassion. It's clear now that I'll have to take action. I've decided to stay in this house with my parents, and Owen will need to leave. Ever since we got married, Owen has depended on me for everything. Now, despite my efforts and the fact that I pay $4,000 a month for rent, he's trying to force me out of my own home. This is my breaking point. For months, I've been contemplating divorce, but Owen's selfishness and cruel remarks have sealed my decision. I told him firmly, I will leave this house. Yes, but for now, you need to go. Quickly. He simply shrugged and replied, fine. I'll be out tonight and back tomorrow evening. Just make sure you're gone by then. The nerve of him. I asked, don't you even care to check what I might take with me? His response? Don't touch my equipment. Do whatever you want with the rest of the stuff. His dismissive attitude left me stunned but also resolute. If he's giving me free rein to handle the household items, I might as well use this opportunity wisely. Perhaps it's time Owen experiences the consequences of his behavior. I've already started planning. If needed, I'll hire a removal service to pack up everything I care about. And Owen? He'll finally get a taste of his own medicine. For context, here's a bit about my situation. I'm Erica, and I'm 31 years old, a graduate from a prestigious program, and I work as a researcher at a well-known company. My career is stable, and my income is respectable for my age. With my earnings, I can afford to live in a luxurious apartment that costs $4,000 per month in rent. On paper, my life seems ideal. I have a good job, a nice home, and a family. Owen, my husband, and Sam, our son. To outsiders, it may appear that I have it all. I understand there are people who struggle with basic necessities, who don't have a roof over their heads, or who are elderly and live alone. In many ways, I am fortunate, and I don't take that for granted. However, my life isn't as picture-perfect as it seems. The truth is, the $4,000 rent weighs heavily on our budget. Even with my decent salary, it's a substantial financial strain. What makes it worse is Owen's refusal to contribute meaningfully. If he had a proper job, we wouldn't have to struggle like this. But Owen, at 32 years old, is still chasing a dream of becoming a musician. I once admired his ambition. He was somewhat popular in his early days, performing at various events and live houses. But let's be real, entertaining a few hundred people here, and there doesn't pay the bills. His income from part-time jobs is unstable, and his dream of making it big as a musician feels more like a fantasy now. Meanwhile, I'm left shouldering all the responsibility. Instead of working toward a stable future for our family, Owen clings to his dreams, leaving me to deal with the harsh realities of life. He dismisses my concerns as if I'm nagging. When I mention the financial burden, his response is always the same. You sound like an old woman with all your complaining. But I'm not complaining. I'm stating facts. I've been patient, supportive, and understanding, but my patience has run out. I've carried this marriage and our family on my shoulders long enough. Owen's refusal to change has forced me to make a choice. Divorce is no longer a distant thought. It's my way forward. I deserve a life where I'm not constantly worrying about rent or being belittled for speaking the truth. My son Sam and I deserve better. It's time to put my well-being first and let go of a relationship that's only holding me back. In the end, I know this decision is for the best. I'm capable of building a happy, secure life for myself and my child without Owen dragging us down. And if that means starting over, so be it. This is my chance to reclaim my independence and create a future where I feel truly fulfilled. When I was younger, I saw Owen shine as he chased his dreams. He seemed amazing, full of promise. When I got pregnant, he said, "I'll work hard for our future child." I was only 20 when we got married and started a family. I thought getting married meant he would give up his music dreams and focus on building a life with us. At first, I felt bad for questioning his choice to stick with part-time jobs and his dream of music. I didn't want to make him feel like he had to give it all up for the family. But after our child was born, everything changed. Owen still kept going with his music and part-time work as if nothing had happened. I couldn't take it anymore. One day, I warned him, "How long do you plan to keep working part-time jobs? You're almost 32. People your age are building careers." Owen just replied, "I have my own way of living. Don't compare me to others." I couldn't believe his answer. "Your words sound good, but they don't mean anything. If you want to talk about living your way, then start by helping out with the household expenses." He tried to justify himself by saying, "When I become famous, I'll make up for the money I'm not earning right now." I snapped back, "Stop dreaming and face reality." Owen had no answer to that. Eventually, he took up a part-time job, but even then it wasn't enough. Earning $2,500 or even $13,000 a month would have helped, but Owen didn't stop talking about his dreams. "You're being too noisy," he'd say. "Times have changed. There are lots of ways to succeed without signing with an agency. I'm not just dreaming anymore. It's just that my name isn't well known yet. Companies hold all the power in advertising, but I'm making progress, even if it's slow." I didn't know how to respond. It's all so confusing to me. When will he realize it's all just an illusion? Owen's band already broke up, and the other members have moved on. Some got married, and others found steady jobs. I think Owen should do the same, but he says things like, "Giving up your dreams is pathetic." I don't see it that way. I think choosing to give up your dreams for the sake of your family is a meaningful and responsible decision. Is that so wrong? When I was pregnant, Owen promised he'd work hard for our child. But now I see what he really meant. He'd keep working hard at his music career. I keep hoping that as our child grows, Owen will finally face reality. "Did you buy expensive clothes again?" I asked. "Looking good is important for my job," he replied. I couldn't believe it. He hasn't made a single dollar from music yet, and here he is talking like he's a star. It's been 11 years since our child was born, and Owen is still working part-time. Now, at almost 32, he spent years chasing his music dreams without any real success or achievements. Instead of earning money, he spends more and more on expensive clothes and music equipment. "I wish you'd spend less on those things and contribute a bit to the household," I told him. "You can't satisfy hunger with pretense," he snapped back. "These things are necessary for me." Because of his attitude, we argue a lot. We try to have these discussions when our child isn't home or moved to another room, but the apartment is small, so he often overhears us if we raise our voices. That's one reason we're considering moving to a bigger place. As our son, Sam, grows, this apartment will only feel more cramped. "Hey, Sam's 11 now, and this place is getting too small. Should we move?" I asked Owen.
"Yeah," he said.
"This was your house originally anyway, right? You lived here alone before we got married. Do you have a problem with that?" I asked. "It's not a problem," he replied. "But I'd like to move to a bigger place, maybe a high-rise condo. That would be cool. And who's going to pay for it? I'll help with the household expenses. You handle the rent, and I'll cover the electricity, gas, and groceries. Please, I really want to live in a high-rise condo." With my salary, moving to a high-rise condo was possible. I was even a little encouraged that Owen offered to help, even in a small way. Maybe this could be the push he needed to understand the value of money and face reality. "Okay," I said. "I'll look for a place, but since I'm paying the rent, I get to choose where we live. Deal?"
"Deal."
"As long as it's a high-rise condo, I'm fine with whatever you pick." I hoped this new chapter would bring some positive changes, but things didn't go as planned. A year after moving into the condo, Owen is still chasing his music dreams at 32, and he hasn't kept any of the promises he made when we moved. Hey, the gas bill came, I reminded him. Make sure you pay it before it's debited from my account. I'll give it to you next time, he said casually, once again failing to take responsibility. I don't have the money right now. When is next time? You always say that, but then you never pay. You're always making excuses. Do you really think money isn't important? All you ever do is fuss about money, Owen replied. All I'm asking for is the minimum amount to cover our bills. Why should I have to keep scolding you about this? I said. He promised he would help with the bills, but it feels like those promises never meant anything. Thankfully, I set up direct payments from my own account for important expenses like electricity and gas. If I hadn't, Owen might not have paid them at all. Every now and then, though, Owen does leave some money behind. Once, I found $100 on the living room table while he wasn't home. It wasn't even close to enough, but I thought maybe he was embarrassed to give it to me directly. For a moment, I wondered if this was his way of showing he cared. Maybe he was trying to be considerate? I quickly realized I was wrong. I still hadn't received a share of the electricity bill for the month. I do pay sometimes, don't I? Owen argued. It felt like he only gave small amounts of money to make himself feel better about not contributing. And then there were the lies. One day, he said, I want to take my parents on a trip. Can you lend me some money? How much do you need? I asked. $100 should be enough, he replied. I handed it over. But deep down, I knew he wasn't taking anyone on a trip. Owen has a habit of lying when he wants pocket money. I know this, and he knows I know, but we still go through the motions. He probably uses the money to treat his friends or show off. Meanwhile, the rent for our high-rise condo is $4,000 a month. It's been this way for 5 years, and I've been struggling to cover it. I thought moving here might inspire Owen to take work more seriously, but he keeps letting me down. I can't save any money in this situation. I'd much rather use the money for something meaningful, like our child's future or retirement. I've thought about divorce before, but now I'm starting to think seriously about it. Then Owen said something that made my decision clear. Hey, we have an unused room, right? I was thinking of clearing out the unused room and making it a space for my parents. What do you think? Owen asked. A room for your parents? Are you saying they'd move in with us? Why are you suddenly bringing this up? I asked, surprised. My parents are getting older. We can't just leave them alone, Owen said, trying to sound noble.
But I know Owen.
He always talks big, but he can't follow through. Who does he think is paying the $4,000 rent for this high-rise condo? I'm also the one covering all the living expenses and our son's education. The idea of being forced to live with my in-laws on top of all this is completely unacceptable. I'm against it, I replied firmly. Don't answer so quickly. Think about it for a while, he said. I have thought about it. My answer is no, I said again. Why are you being so stubborn? What's wrong with taking care of your parents? Are you telling me to abandon mine? You're heartless, he snapped. To someone just listening to this conversation, I might sound selfish, but that's not true. The problem isn't his parents, it's Owen. If his parents move in, I know exactly what will happen. Owen will dump all the responsibility of taking care of them on me. I'm already doing everything for this household. I cannot, and will not take on even more. I will not live with your parents, I said firmly. Owen glared at me. I see how heartless you are. Fine. I'll live here with my parents, so you need to leave, he said angrily. I couldn't believe it. Ever since we got married, Owen has been completely dependent on me. And now, he's trying to kick me out of the house, even though I'm the one paying the $4,000 rent every month. His words made me realize how helpless and irresponsible he truly is. I've been considering divorce for a while, but now I'm sure. His unreasonable demands and selfishness have made my decision clear. Fine. I'll leave the house, I said. Good. Pack your things and get out quickly. I'm going out now, but I'll be back tomorrow evening. Be gone by then, he said coldly. Are you sure you don't want to check what I'm taking with me? I asked. Don't touch my equipment. Do whatever you want with the rest, he replied before leaving the house. Now that Owen was gone, I realized I was free to handle everything in the house. As I stood there thinking, my 15-year-old son, Sam, came out of his room. "Mom, I'll help you pack. And I'll go with you too," he said softly, trying to comfort me. It broke my heart. Whenever Owen and I fought, Sam would quietly go to another room to avoid the tension. As a parent, it hurts me deeply that my child feels like he has to tiptoe around these situations. When Sam was younger, he loved playing with his dad and didn't understand what was really happening. But as he grew older, he began to see the truth. Now he supports me in ways no child should have to. "Where should we start, Mom?" Sam asked. "Start with your own things," I said. "I have something else to handle." "I just want to give him a little shock," I thought as I grabbed my phone and made a call. "Hello. I'm sorry for the last-minute request, but could you help us tomorrow?" After packing up what we needed, my son and I decided to stay in a business hotel for a while with just the essentials. We would have to find a new place to live soon. That evening, knowing Owen would call, I placed my phone on the table and waited. When it rang, Sam and I looked at each other, and I picked it up. "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing?" Owen shouted on the other end. "What do you mean? What's the problem?" I asked calmly. "All my clothes and equipment are here, but everything else is gone. Where are the tables? The fridge? Did you take them?" "No," I replied. "I called a junk removal service to get rid of everything. By now, it's probably already been burned." "Sam, are you there too?" Owen asked, sounding even more panicked. When Sam spoke up, Owen seemed completely caught off guard. He probably didn't expect Sam to still be around and was shocked to find the house nearly empty. "What do you mean everything's gone?" "The furniture and appliances, those are marital property," he said angrily. "You told me I could do whatever I wanted with everything except your equipment," I reminded him. "So I did just that. How am I supposed to live now?" Owen asked, his voice full of frustration. "If you need furniture, you can buy new ones. For now, maybe use your amp as a chair or wrap your guitar in a towel for a pillow," I replied with a hint of sarcasm. "That's not funny. How could you do something so nasty?" he snapped. "We're getting a divorce," I said firmly. "Yes, I understand," Owen replied. He sounded like he expected me to be shaken by the mention of divorce. Maybe he thought this was just another argument that would eventually blow over. But I had already made up my mind. His words didn't scare me. They only made me feel more certain about my decision. In fact, I was almost relieved that he brought it up. "Really? You understand? We're getting a divorce," I repeated, making sure he knew I was serious. "You don't have to say it so many times." "I understand," I said coldly and calmly, making it clear that this was final. Owen must have realized that the divorce would hurt him more than it would hurt me. He seemed flustered, unsure of what to say next. Normally, he'd apologize and back down, but this time, he couldn't. Maybe it's his stubborn pride as a musician. He can't admit defeat. But I know Owen too well. Once he says something, he doesn't take it back, even if he regrets it. At first, Owen acted like he had everything under control, but now it all seems ridiculous. "We'll talk about the details of the divorce later," I said. "You're planning to live in this house with your parents, right? Should I go to the real estate agent first to update the contract?" Owen hesitated. "Yeah, but if the contract is changed to my name, the divorce can't be undone." "This is your chance to apologize," he said, his voice shaky. It felt like a weak, last-ditch attempt to stop what was happening. Maybe he thought my decision to get rid of the furniture and appliances was part of some master plan to force a divorce. But after 15 years of frustration, my feelings weren't going to change so easily. Deep down, I wished he would face the consequences a bit more. A few days later, Owen and I went to the real estate office to review the condo contract. I smoothly ended my part of the agreement. The process was quick and simple. But when Owen tried to sign a new contract, there was a big problem. "What?" "The rent is $4,500. Owen's face turned pale. When I first signed the contract for the high-rise condo, Owen left everything to me, choosing the property, negotiating, and signing the paperwork. He never even asked about the details, so he had no idea how expensive it was. "There's no way I can pay that rent, even if my parents help," Owen said in shock. Apparently, after I left, Owen planned to rely on his parents to share the cost of the rent. He assumed that between the three of them, they could manage it. But the actual rent was way more than he expected. Since his parents are retired and only have their pensions, and Owen is a part-time worker with an unstable income, it was clear they couldn't afford it. I had already seen this coming. "You've been paying this much every month?" Owen asked, stunned. "Yes," I replied. "I've been paying it the whole time. Because you don't work, we haven't been able to save anything. I can't handle a contract like this," Owen admitted. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "I don't think you can handle it either." "What do you mean?" Owen asked, looking confused. He seemed so overwhelmed that he didn't even understand the basic requirements for renting a property. I turned to the real estate agent. "Excuse me, is it possible for someone with an irregular income of $2,500 per month to qualify for this contract if their parents cover the difference?" The agent shook their head. "No, that would be very difficult. The applicant needs to have a stable income to qualify." I looked at Owen. "See? I told you it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to pass the screening." Owen sat there in silence, realizing for the first time just how far out of his depth he was. The real estate agent, hearing our conversation, probably realized we were about to separate. He gave a small, uneasy smile, but didn't say much. "So, what do I do now?" Owen asked. "If you can't sign the contract, you have no choice but to leave," I said. "There's no other option since I've already canceled my part of the contract." Owen looked shocked. "Wow, you've done something ridiculous again." Owen, who likes to call himself an artist, doesn't have much self-esteem, but he loves to show off. This situation must have been a huge embarrassment for him. With his low income, our pending divorce, and now being outsmarted by me in front of the agent, his face turned red and sweaty like he had just run a marathon in the middle of summer. Ignoring Owen, I continued speaking to the agent. "Since the contract can't go through, we'll need to move out right away, correct? I'm sorry for the trouble, but we don't have much left in the house. It's mostly just clothes and music equipment. It shouldn't take long to clean up. Can you guide me on the procedures for moving out?" Owen interrupted. "You knew I didn't understand the rent or the conditions of the house, and you still went ahead with all of this. What do you mean?" "I asked if you wanted to review the contract, and you said you'd handle it yourself," I replied. "Whether you knew about my income or not, I thought there might still be a way to make it work." Owen said, clearly frustrated. "Don't be ridiculous," I said calmly. "I'm not leaving," Owen insisted. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call the police," I replied. "I don't know all the legal details, but you could be sued for trespassing or refusing to vacate. And since this isn't my property anymore, the real estate agency or the owner might get involved. It could get messy if a company reports it." The agent looked increasingly uncomfortable as Owen stood there in silence. "You don't want to embarrass yourself any further, do you? Go home and pack your things," I told Owen. Without another word, Owen left the real estate office. I turned to the agent. "I'm sorry for all the trouble. The house will be empty soon. If anything is left behind, I'll take care of disposing of it." Later, when the agent and I went to the condo, it was already empty. To apologize for the awkward situation and any inconvenience caused, I brought some sweets to the real estate office. The process itself went smoothly, but I could tell the agent was still a bit confused by everything that had happened. "I'm truly sorry about how things turned out, but this situation brought the dreamy musician back to reality. Now, he has no choice but to face the real world." After he left the house, our divorce was officially finalized. Since neither of us had much money, me spending most of mine on rent, and him barely earning anything, there was no argument over dividing assets. My son decided to stay with me. As for my ex-husband, he probably thought he could rely on his parents for support, but I had already closed that door. After being married for about 11 years, I reached out to my in-laws to inform them about the divorce and to say my goodbyes. I felt it was only right to keep them informed about the process. When my in-laws learned about all the things my ex-husband had done, they chose to step back and stop supporting him. They told him they wouldn't help him anymore until he found a stable job and became independent. Because of this, his plan to move in with his parents fell apart. Now over 32 years old, My ex-husband is finding it difficult to get a regular job after living so long as a freelancer. He continues to work freelance, but his income is still very low. He struggles to even pay rent for a small, cheap apartment. In this situation, continuing his music career is nearly impossible. This is the reality for my ex-husband, a man who achieved nothing. As for me, I've rented a new apartment where I now live with my son. Without my ex-husband, the rent is much lower, and I can use my money for more meaningful things. While I don't criticize people for chasing their dreams, I've found happiness in creating a comfortable and stable life for my son and me. This is what truly matters to me now. It's funny how life can change in the blink of an eye. I'm Megan, and as I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I'm reminded of how quickly things can unravel. I'm in my early 30s, living a simple life in a small town near Portland, Oregon. It's a peaceful place where everyone knows each other, and the pace of life is slow. I used to think this was all I needed until I met Ryan. It all started at a cozy cafe just a few blocks from my apartment. When he walked in, I was there, sipping my coffee and trying to finish a book. Ryan was charming in that effortless way some people can be early 30s, with a warm smile and an easy confidence that drew people in. He seemed perfect, or at least perfect for me at that moment. We started a conversation about the book I was reading, and before long, we were meeting for coffee regularly. It wasn't long before our meetings turned into something more serious. We had so much in common, and it felt like we were two pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Our relationship grew quickly. We bonded over shared interests, and our discussions soon turned to marriage. Ryan worked in an office job, and while my occupation wasn't specifically mentioned, I valued my independence and self-respect deeply. I had always been proud of standing on my own 2 feet, and Ryan seemed to appreciate that about me. But as they say, the honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. It was when I met Ryan's parents that things began to shift. His mother, Karen, was in her late 60s and came across as the type who was used to getting her way. From the moment we were introduced, it was clear she had strong opinions about everything. She was overbearing and manipulative, a real piece of work. I tried my best to make a good impression, but it didn't take long for me to realize that Karen wasn't fond of me. Karen had a controlling nature and an unyielding grip on Ryan. She was obsessed with maintaining control over him and, of course, protecting the family's wealth. During one of our meetings, she insisted that we sign a prenuptial agreement before we could even think about marriage. Ryan and I discussed it, and although I was hesitant, I agreed. The prenuptial agreement had a clause that stipulated that if either of us cheated, the offending partner would have to pay $770,000. I was willing to accept this to make Ryan and Karen happy, even though the idea of it left a bad taste in my mouth. Little did I know this agreement was just the beginning of the problems to come. As Ryan and I settled into our life together, Karen's interference only grew worse. She focused relentlessly on our struggles to conceive a child. Her constant criticism wore me down and began to erode my self-esteem. It felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't escape her harsh judgment. Ryan, unfortunately, didn't stand up for me. He seemed to let Karen's opinions dictate our lives, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated. I had never felt so alone in a relationship before. My self-respect was slipping away, and I started to question my place in Ryan's life. The tipping point came when I began to notice changes in Ryan's behavior. He started taking late-night work calls and paying more attention to his appearance, which struck me as odd. My suspicions grew, and I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my gut. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It was a desperate measure, but I needed to know the truth. The investigator's report was devastating. Ryan was having an affair. I felt shattered, but instead of confronting him right away, I decided to keep the information to myself and plan my next move carefully. I was determined not to let Ryan or Karen see me as a pushover. It wasn't just Ryan's betrayal that hurt, it was the realization that Karen was part of this betrayal, too. I overheard a conversation between them one evening, and it was like a punch to the gut. They were discussing how they could use me to fund an expensive birthday gift for Karen and then discard me. I was nothing more than a pawn in their scheme. That's when I knew I had to take control of the situation, so I started making my plans. I knew that if I wanted to get out of this mess and come out on top, I needed to be strategic. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't going to let Ryan and Karen get away with treating me like this. Little did they know their actions had set the stage for a dramatic turn of events. The road ahead was going to be challenging, but I was ready to reclaim my life and show them that I was stronger than they ever thought. It's strange how a single conversation can change everything. That evening, when I overheard Ryan and Karen plotting their plan to use me for Karen's birthday gift, I felt a surge of clarity. I wasn't just a victim in this situation, I was someone who could take control and turn things around. I just had to be smart about it. Ryan and I continued our daily routines, but the tension was palpable. I kept the investigators' findings close to my chest, using every ounce of willpower to avoid confronting him. My resolve was to make sure my exit would be as powerful as it was calculated. I needed to hit them where it would hurt the most, and that meant waiting for the right moment. Karen's 72nd birthday was approaching, and I knew this would be my chance. It would be the perfect opportunity to set my plan in motion. I decided to host a grand dinner at one of Portland's most luxurious restaurants. It would be a night of elegance and extravagance, a night that would end with a bang, literally and metaphorically. As the day of the birthday dinner drew nearer, I was meticulous in my preparations. Every detail was accounted for: the menu, the seating arrangement, and the timing. I wanted everything to be perfect. Ryan and Karen, unaware of my plan, were focused on their excitement. Karen was particularly looking forward to the event, basking in the attention and luxury of the evening. Ryan seemed particularly proud, showing off how well he had arranged the evening. I played my role perfectly, looking every bit the supportive wife, though inside I was a storm of anticipation. As the evening drew to a close, Ryan took the floor to make an announcement. The guests fell silent, their curiosity piqued. With Karen at his side, Ryan looked at me and said, "Megan and I have decided to part ways. We're getting a divorce." His voice was steady, but I could see the anxiety behind his eyes. Karen's face was a mask of faux sympathy, though I could sense the glee behind her composed expression. The room erupted in murmurs, but I remained calm. I had prepared for this moment. As we left the restaurant, I made sure Ryan and Karen would be left with the bill. Earlier in the evening, I had blocked access to our shared bank account, making sure they were stuck with the $25,000 restaurant bill. It was a small but satisfying act of revenge. Once we were outside, I put my plan into action. I had a folder with me containing the divorce papers and a copy of the prenuptial agreement. Ryan's confusion was evident when I handed them over. The prenuptial agreement clearly stated that if either party was unfaithful, they would owe the other $770,000. Ryan's face went pale as he read the document. "What is this, Megan?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Consider it a parting gift," I replied coolly. "I've had enough of your lies and manipulation." Karen tried to intervene, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Megan, you don't need to do this," she said, her voice desperate. "Let's talk about this." I ignored her. "I've made my decision," I said firmly. "I'm leaving, and you'll have to deal with the consequences." The look of disbelief on Ryan's face was something I would never forget. I knew it was going to be a rough few days for them, but I was determined to stand my ground. They had used me, belittled me, and tried to discard me as if I were nothing. This was my chance to show them that I was not someone to be underestimated. As I walked away from the restaurant, I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. The next morning, I knew I had to confront Ryan and Karen with the reality of their situation. They would have to come to terms with the fallout of their actions and the financial burden I had imposed upon them. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that my actions had set the stage for a new chapter in my life. The journey wasn't over, but I had taken the first crucial step in reclaiming my power and my dignity. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was determined to face it with the strength and resolve I had rediscovered within myself. The morning after Karen's birthday dinner was one of the most surreal moments of my life. I had managed to turn the tables, but the reality of what lay ahead started to sink in. Ryan and Karen were left reeling from the shock of the divorce papers and the $770,000 I was entitled to. I knew they'd be desperate, but I was resolute. This was my moment to reclaim my life and dignity. I decided to confront them at their home, where the tension would be palpable. As I drove over to their house, my mind raced with thoughts of what I might face. Ryan might try to convince me to drop the case, and Karen would undoubtedly attempt to manipulate me further, but I was prepared for their pleas. I had made up my mind and was not going to be swayed. When I arrived, I could see Ryan pacing anxiously in the front yard. Karen stood beside him, her face a mask of feigned calm. They looked up as I approached, and I could see the mix of anger and desperation in their eyes. "Megan, we need to talk," Ryan said, his voice strained. "This isn't necessary. We can work something out." I took a deep breath and met his gaze firmly. "I don't think there's anything left to discuss, Ryan. I've made my decision. The prenuptial agreement is clear, and I'm entitled to this $770,000 due to your infidelity." Karen, trying to maintain her composure, stepped forward. "Megan, please, this is not the time for harsh decisions. We can come to an arrangement, can't we? Let's sit down and discuss this reasonably." I shook my head. "There's nothing to negotiate. I've already consulted my lawyer and everything is in order. I'm not changing my mind." Ryan's face grew darker. "You're ruining everything for us, Megan. You know this will cause a lot of trouble. You're going to regret this." I remained calm. "If you think I'm going to regret standing up for myself after all the lies and manipulation, you're mistaken. I'm done being a pawn in your games." The confrontation didn't last long. They were frustrated and out of options, but their attempts to sway me only made me more resolute. I handed them a copy of the divorce papers and the prenuptial agreement once more, just to make sure there was no misunderstanding. I could see the reality hitting them as they read through the documents. Ryan's face was a mix of shock and anger, while Karen's eyes darted nervously. They knew they were facing a significant financial burden, and it was clear they were worried about their future. Before leaving, I made it clear that I was moving forward with my life and that they should do the same. "This is my final decision," I said. "I'm leaving this chapter behind and starting a new one. I hope you both find a way to move on, but I won't be part of your lives any longer." I walked away feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The sense of closure was bittersweet, but it was the beginning of a new journey. I knew that I had made the right choice and that my actions were justified. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was prepared to face whatever came next with the strength I had found within myself. The financial settlement wasn't just about the money, it was about taking back my power. I had endured too much and sacrificed too much to let myself be sidelined by Ryan and Karen's schemes. Their attempts to use me for their benefit had only fueled my determination to succeed on my terms. As I settled into my new life, I focused on the positive changes I could make for myself. The journey wasn't easy, but I was ready to embrace the future with a renewed sense of purpose. The confrontation was over, but the lessons learned would stay with me forever. It's strange how quickly life can change. After such a dramatic shift, when I finally left Ryan and Karen behind, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The days following our confrontation were a whirlwind of activity as I finalized the divorce and prepared to start fresh. The $770,000 settlement gave me the financial freedom I needed to carve out a new life, but it was the emotional liberation that mattered most. My priority was to find a new home. I wanted a place where I could rebuild my life and truly feel at peace. After weeks of house hunting, I stumbled upon a charming little house on the outskirts of Portland. It wasn't extravagant, but it was cozy, surrounded by a beautiful garden and a sense of tranquility that I had longed for. When I moved in, it felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. The small house quickly became my sanctuary. I spent hours planting flowers, setting up my favorite furniture, and making it truly mine. Gardening became a new passion, something that allowed me to focus on the present and forget the chaos of my past. I had heard rumors about Ryan's new relationship and the trouble he was facing, but I made a conscious effort to stay away from the gossip. My priority was to focus on my well-being and embrace the simple pleasures that came with my newfound independence. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of information from old acquaintances, but I chose to ignore them. My peace of mind was worth more than any of the drama I had left behind. Life in my new home was fulfilling. I enjoyed quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons tending to my garden, and evenings reading or working on small projects. The stability I found in my routines was comforting. I had finally managed to separate myself from the toxic influences of Ryan and Karen and was able to focus on what made me truly happy. One day, while I was working in the garden, I thought back on everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the emotional turmoil had been overwhelming, but they had also made me stronger. I realized that I had emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of myself and a renewed sense of self-respect. As I reflected on the past, I was grateful for the strength I had found to stand up for myself and make the difficult decisions necessary for my well-being. The journey had been far from easy, but it had taught me invaluable lessons about self-worth and resilience. The final chapter of my story with Ryan and Karen was over, but it had set the stage for a new beginning. I had taken control of my life and had chosen to prioritize my happiness. The scars from the past were a reminder of my strength and the importance of never settling for less than I deserved. In the end, my life was about moving forward, cherishing the present, and embracing the future with open arms. I had found contentment in the life I was building for myself, and that was more valuable than any amount of money or material possessions. The story of my journey from betrayal to empowerment was a testament to the power of self-respect and the importance of reclaiming one's life after hardship. I had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, ready to enjoy the simple, fulfilling life I had always wanted. The final thought I want to leave behind is that no matter how difficult the road may be, there is always hope and strength within us to overcome the challenges. My story is one of resilience and renewal, and it is a reminder that we all have the power to shape our destinies.